I am Zuri, 35 years old, and I thought I had finally built a life safe from my family's manipulation. Last Sunday, they lured me to an exclusive country club under the guise of celebrating my birthday. But instead of a celebration, my father slid a stack of legal papers across the table, demanding I sign over my entire inheritance to bail out my sister. When I calmly refused, my mother stood up in the crowded dining room and screamed that I was a drug addict who needed to be locked away. I simply dropped $100 bill on the table and exposed a secret that made my brother-in-law turn ghostly pale. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your peace from the very people who were supposed to love you. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Atlanta, our family projected an image of absolute perfection. My father, Calvin, ran a successful corporate logistics firm, while my mother, Vivian, was a prominent figure on every local charity board and alumni network. To the outside world, we were the epitome of excellence. But inside the walls of our sprawling brick estate, love was a currency entirely dependent on compliance. I was always the scapegoat, the daughter who asked too many questions and refused to fit perfectly into the rigid mold they had cast for me. My younger sister Chloe, however, was the golden child. She was everything they wanted her to be: compliant, socially strategic, and effortlessly graceful in navigating their high society expectations. For months, I had maintained a strict boundary of low contact with them. I had spent the last decade building my own life from the ground up, quietly amassing a fortune they knew absolutely nothing about. So when my mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, insisting they wanted to host a belated 35th birthday brunch for me at their country club, my internal alarms blared. But a small, foolish part of me, the part that still longed for genuine parental affection, convinced me to go. I thought perhaps time and distance had softened their sharp edges. I was entirely wrong. The following Sunday, I pulled my car into the long, oak-lined driveway of the country club. The mahogany-paneled dining room was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood, stifling, pretentious, and filled with people who cared more about appearances than actual human connection. I spotted my family sitting at a large round table near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. My father sat at the head of the table wearing his tailored Sunday suit, his posture rigid and commanding. My mother sat to his right, adorned in her signature pearls and a fixed, socially acceptable smile. Across from them sat Chloe, looking immaculately put together, and her husband, Trent. Trent was a man born on third base who spent his entire life believing he hit a triple. He was white, dripping with unearned entitlement, and had spent the last 5 years bouncing from one failed tech startup to another, always funded by my parents and their generous capital. I took a deep breath, plastered a polite smile on my face, and approached the table. The pleasantries lasted exactly 3 minutes. There was no mention of my birthday, no asking how I had been, no inquiries about my life. The moment the waiter poured my black coffee and stepped away, the atmosphere at the table shifted violently. My father reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, densely packed stack of legal documents. Without a word of preamble, he slid the papers across the pristine white linen tablecloth until they rested directly in front of my coffee cup. I looked down at the documents and then back up at my father, keeping my expression entirely neutral. He folded his hands on the table and cleared his throat. He explained that Chloe and Trent had run into some unexpected financial headwinds with their latest venture. Unexpected headwinds was his sanitized way of saying they had completely bankrupted their third consecutive startup and were currently drowning in massive debt. I went on to say that the family needed to present a united front to protect their assets and their reputation. And then came the demand. He told me I needed to sign over the trust fund our late grandmother had left exclusively to me. My grandmother was the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. She recognized the toxic dynamic in our household and deliberately bypassed my parents when she passed away, leaving a substantial trust entirely in my name. It was my only inheritance, my safety net, and a tangible reminder of the one person who had loved me unconditionally. Now my father was demanding I surrender it to clean up Trent's mess. I looked at the papers, and a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I did not feel the familiar childhood panic or the desperate urge to appease them. I just felt a cold, deep exhaustion. I pushed the documents back across the table, shaking my head slowly. I told them very calmly that the trust was mine, that grandmother had left it to me for a reason, and that I would not be liquidating my future to subsidize Trent's continued failures. The moment my refusal registered, the mask of upper-class civility completely slipped from my mother's face. Vivian sat up straight, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. She knew she could not physically force me to sign, so she resorted to the only weapon she had ever successfully wielded against me, which was psychological warfare. She raised her voice deliberately, disregarding the quiet atmosphere of the country club dining room. I could see the guests at neighboring tables pausing their conversations, their eyes darting toward our table. My mother wanted an audience. She wanted to shame me into submission. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me and began to loudly dissect my physical appearance. For the past year, I had been rigorously training for a marathon. The intense training schedule combined with my strict nutrition plan had resulted in a 30-pound weight loss. I was the healthiest and strongest I had ever been in my entire life. Furthermore, I had been working 80-hour weeks scaling my company, leading to some inevitable late nights and dark circles under my eyes. To anyone else, I looked like a disciplined, hardworking woman. To my mother, I was the perfect canvas for her malicious fiction. She projected her voice so it echoed off the mahogany panels. She told me to look at myself. She said I was erratic, that I was shrinking away to nothing, and that the dark circles under my eyes told the whole story. She crossed her arms and delivered the final devastating blow. She declared that I was clearly using drugs. She said my refusal to help the family was just proof of my addiction, that the money would only go to feed my habits, and that I needed to sign the papers immediately before they had to take legal action to lock me up for my own good. I glanced over at Chloe. My sister did not look concerned or shocked by this monstrous accusation against her own flesh and blood. Instead, she leaned back in her upholstered chair, casually swirling the orange juice in her mimosa glass. A smug, knowing smile played on her lips. She was enjoying this. She was reveling in watching the family scapegoat being publicly dismantled so she could walk away with the prize. They had choreographed this entire intervention. They honestly believed that by threatening me with a public scandal and questioning my sanity, I would crumble, cry, and sign whatever they wanted just to make the humiliation stop. What they did not understand was that the frightened, desperate to please girl they had known was gone. She had died years ago, starved out by their conditional love. In her place sat a woman who had built an empire from scratch, a woman who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts before breakfast. They wanted me to play into their stereotypes. They wanted me to yell, to flip the table, to cause a scene that would validate my mother's horrific narrative to everyone watching in that dining room. They wanted proof that I was unstable. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my marathon training or explain my work hours. I did not shed a single tear. I maintained a chilling, absolute calm that seemed to unnerve my father more than any screaming match ever could. I slowly reached into my designer handbag, the cost of which alone rivaled the trust fund they were trying to steal. I pulled out my wallet and extracted a crisp, newly minted $100 bill. I smoothed it out and placed it deliberately in the center of the white linen tablecloth right next to the untouched legal documents. I kept my voice incredibly soft, forcing them to lean in to hear me over the ambient noise of the restaurant. I told my mother that her performance was a solid 8 out of 10, but her script needed work. Then I shifted my gaze away from my parents and locked eyes directly with Trent. Trent had been sitting quietly, letting my parents do his dirty work, looking every bit the innocent victim of circumstance. I leaned forward slightly and addressed him by name. I told him I was curious about his current financial predicament. I asked him very casually how his new angel investors felt about the fact that he took their initial round of seed money and gambled it away over a 4-day weekend at the Bellagio casino last month. I asked if he had managed to explain to them how betting on black at the roulette tables was a viable corporate growth strategy. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Trent went violently pale, the color draining from his face so fast I thought he might pass out right there in his upholstered chair. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, strangled sound came out. Chloe dropped her mimosa glass, the liquid splashing onto the pristine tablecloth, her smug smile vanishing into a mask of utter confusion and panic. She looked at her husband, demanding to know what I was talking about, but Trent could not even look at her. I did not wait for the fallout. I picked up my purse, stood up from the table, and smoothed the skirt of my dress. I looked down at my father, whose jaw was practically resting on his chest, and told him that the $100 was to cover the cost of my black coffee and the terrible entertainment. I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit with my head held high, my posture perfect, and my dignity completely intact. As I walked across the dining room, the silence of the other patrons parted for me like water. Just as I reached the heavy glass doors of the lobby, I heard my father finally find his voice. He roared my name across the dining room, his voice shaking with absolute rage, bellowing that I would not get away with disrespecting this family. I did not even break my stride. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, knowing that the war had just begun, but completely certain that I was going to be the one to finish it. 2 days after the disaster at the country club, I was sitting in a velvet booth at Grounded, my favorite black-owned coffee shop downtown. The air smelled of roasted espresso beans and shea butter, a comforting backdrop to the high-stakes work spread across our table. Sitting across from me was Tanya, my best friend since our undergraduate days, and the brilliant chief operating officer of my company. We were reviewing the final terms of a massive state healthcare contract that would expand the Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network into 3 new major cities. It was the kind of deal that cemented legacies, the culmination of years of relentless grinding and strategic maneuvering. Tanya tapped her manicured fingernail against a specific clause in the document and pointed out that the state wanted to increase our vendor capacity by another 20% for the upcoming fiscal year. She took a sip of her oat milk latte and smiled, telling me that we were about to become the largest independent rehabilitation provider in the entire region. I leaned back against the plush velvet seat, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment wash over me. I had built this empire from nothing, starting with a single small clinic and scaling it into a network that actually saved lives and generated tens of millions in revenue. I told Tanya to approve the expansion clause and forward the finalized draft to our legal team. Everything in my world felt perfectly aligned, secure, and completely under my control. That peace was shattered exactly 4 seconds later. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed, and a man in a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit walked in. He looked completely out of place among the stylish morning crowd of creatives and business professionals. He scanned the room, his eyes darting from table to table before pulling a photograph from his jacket pocket. He looked at the photo, looked directly at me, and marched straight toward our booth. Tanya stopped talking mid-sentence, her protective instincts immediately flaring as the man stopped at the edge of our table. He did not bother to lower his voice. In fact, he spoke loudly enough that the conversations at the 2 closest tables ground to a sudden halt. He looked me dead in the eye, asked if my name was Zuri, and before I could even formulate a response, he slammed a thick, heavy manila envelope down onto the pristine contract documents we had been reviewing. "You have been served," he announced, his voice carrying over the smooth jazz playing from the shop speakers. He turned on his heel and walked out just as quickly as he had arrived, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in his wake. Tanya stared at the manila envelope as if it were a live explosive. She looked at me, her brow furrowed in deep confusion, and asked what on earth was going on. I did not answer immediately. My heart was beating in a steady, measured rhythm, but a cold prickle of intuition crawled up my spine. My family had promised I would not get away with walking out on them, and my father was not a man who made empty threats. He was a man who used power and intimidation to bend the world to his will. I reached out and picked up the envelope. The paper was thick and official. I tore open the seal and pulled out a dense stack of legal filings, the front page bearing the official seal of the State Superior Court. I read the bold, capitalized header at the top of the first page, and the words seemed to blur together before locking into a sharp, horrifying reality. Emergency petition for temporary conservatorship. I felt the air leave my lungs. I read the next line, identifying the petitioner. It was my father, Calvin. I quickly scanned down the page to the summary of claims, and the sheer audacity of what I was reading made my blood run cold. Under the penalty of perjury, my father had filed a legal petition claiming that I was a severe substance abuser who was actively spiraling out of control. The document alleged that I was a danger to myself, entirely detached from reality, and completely incapable of managing my basic personal needs or my finances. Tanya shifted into the seat next to me, leaning over my shoulder to read the documents. I heard her gasp. She grabbed my arm, her voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and absolute rage. She asked me what kind of sick joke this was and pointed to a specific paragraph halfway down the second page. I followed her finger and read the section outlining the proposed legal remedy. My father was formally requesting that the court strip me of my autonomy and place my entire financial estate under the immediate control of a court-appointed conservator. And right there, listed as the generous, concerned family member willing to take on the heavy burden of managing my supposedly squandered assets, was my brother-in-law, Trent. They were not just trying to bully me into handing over my grandmother's trust fund. They had weaponized the legal system to strip me of my civil rights. They wanted to declare me mentally incompetent and legally hand the keys of my entire life over to the very man who had just gambled away his investors' seed money in Las Vegas. The petition contained a wildly fabricated narrative. Calvin claimed that I had recently suffered a massive physical deterioration, citing the weight I had lost during my marathon training as evidence of a severe narcotic addiction. He claimed that I was unemployed, destitute, and funneling whatever meager resources I had left into illicit substances. He painted a picture of a broken, tragic woman who had isolated herself from her loving, supportive family out of shame and addiction. It was a masterclass in projection and manipulation. They were trying to cage me using the exact stereotypes they knew society was always eager to believe. Tanya practically shoved her coffee cup out of the way, her eyes flashing with a fierce, protective anger. She told me we were leaving right now and heading straight to Julian's office. Julian was our corporate attorney, a man known throughout the city for his ruthless precision and absolute lack of mercy in the courtroom. Tanya grabbed the state healthcare contracts and shoved them into her briefcase, declaring that Calvin and Trent had just made the biggest, most fatal mistake of their worthless lives. I did not move right away. I sat in the velvet booth staring at the signature on the bottom of the affidavit. It was a signature from a doctor I had never met, a man claiming to have reviewed my behaviors and endorsing the emergency petition based on my family's testimony. They had found a corrupt physician in Calvin's country club network willing to sign off on a fraudulent medical assessment to bypass the standard evidentiary requirements. They had fast-tracked the process, operating in the shadows while I was busy running my company. I slowly folded the documents and placed them back into the manila envelope. The sadness I might have felt at this absolute betrayal was completely eclipsed by a deep, terrifying focus. My father thought he was dealing with the vulnerable, discarded daughter he had kicked out 17 years ago. He thought he could use the law to force me back under his thumb and steal the only thing my grandmother had left me to ensure my survival. He thought I was weak. I slid out of the booth, my posture perfectly straight. I looked at Tanya and told her to call Julian and tell him to clear his entire morning schedule. I walked out of the coffee shop with the manila envelope gripped tightly in my hand, no longer a daughter dealing with family drama, but a CEO preparing to completely dismantle a hostile takeover. The ride to Julian downtown office took 20 minutes, but inside Tanya car, the silence made it feel like a lifetime. Tanya gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror as if she expected my father process server to be tailing us. I remained perfectly still in the passenger seat. I did not look at the manila envelope resting on my lap. I did not need to. I had already memorized the audacity of every fabricated claim printed on those pages. My father had declared war, and he had chosen the legal system as his battlefield. It was a tactical error of catastrophic proportions, and I was going to make sure he felt the full weight of that mistake. We pulled into the underground parking garage of a glittering glass high-rise in the financial district. Julian was a senior partner at one of the most formidable corporate law firms in the state. He was a shark in a bespoke suit, a man whose billable hours were matched only by his absolute refusal to lose. When Tanya and I stepped out of the private elevator and walked through the mahogany double doors of his firm, his assistant did not even ask us to sit. She took one look at my face, stood up, and immediately escorted us down the long corridor to his corner office. Julian was standing by his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city skyline, a Bluetooth earpiece in his ear. He held up a finger, spoke two sharp, decisive words into his headset to terminate a multi-million-dollar negotiation, and ended the call. He turned around, taking in Tanya's furious expression and my absolute freezing calm. He walked over to his massive glass desk, gesturing for us to sit in the leather chairs opposite him. I did not sit. I tossed the thick manila envelope onto the center of his desk. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet, climate-controlled room. I told Julian to read it. Julian pulled a pair of silver reading glasses from his breast pocket, slipped them on, and opened the envelope. Tanya paced the length of the office, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She told Julian that Calvin and Trent were trying to put me in a conservatorship. She spat the word out like venom. She explained that they had filed an emergency petition claiming I was a severe substance abuser, completely detached from reality, and legally incompetent to manage my own finances. Julian's eyes scanned the first page, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to predatory focus. He flipped to the second page, then the third, his eyes locking onto the medical affidavit, signed by my father, golf buddy. A slow, dangerous smile crept across Julian's face. He took his glasses off and placed them neatly next to the fraudulent petition. He looked at me and asked the most critical question. He wanted to know why they were making this move right now, and more importantly, why they genuinely believed I was a destitute addict. I finally sat down in the leather chair, crossing my legs and folding my hands in my lap. I told Julian it was because they needed my grandmother trust fund to cover Trent's latest financial disaster, and because I had not spoken a word about my life to them in 17 years. They saw my weight loss from marathon training and my exhaustion from scaling a corporate empire, and their minds immediately jumped to the most stereotypical, degrading conclusion possible. They needed me to be broken so they could be the saviors. Julian leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingertips together. He asked me to explain the origin of the estrangement. He needed the complete picture to build the counteroffensive, to understand exactly how deeply my father's arrogance had blinded him to the reality of my existence. I looked out the window at the sprawling city, letting the memories I had buried for over a decade rise to the surface. I told Julian about the night everything shattered. I was 18 years old, standing in my father's immaculate wood-paneled study. I had just received a full scholarship offer for an undergraduate program focused on social work and public health. Calvin had slammed his fist on his desk, his face contorted with rage. He had meticulously planned my entire life. I was supposed to major in corporate law, join a prestige firm, and eventually take over the legal division of his logistics company. I was supposed to be a shiny, obedient accessory to his legacy. When I looked him in the eye and told him I wanted to build healthcare systems that actually helped our community instead of protecting corporate profit margins, he gave me an ultimatum. He told me that if I walked out of his study, I would no longer be his daughter. He told me he would cut off every cent of my financial support, strip me of my car, cancel my health insurance, and erase me from the family tree. He promised me I would fail. He promised me I would end up on the streets, begging to come back to him. I told Julian how I had packed a single duffel bag that night, walked out the front door, and never looked back. Tanya stopped pacing and leaned against the glass desk. She looked at Julian and filled in the gaps. She told him about the reality of those early years, the years my parents spent pretending I did not exist. She described how I worked brutal, grueling night shifts at a rundown rehabilitation clinic on the south side of the city. I spent my nights mopping floors coated in biohazards, doing intake for patients battling severe withdrawals, and seeing the devastating, raw reality of addiction firsthand. I worked 70-hour weeks for minimum wage just to keep a roof over my head and pay my own way through my undergraduate degree. I took over the narrative, explaining to Julian how I had saved every spare dollar to pay for my master's degree in healthcare administration. I ate instant noodles for 3 years. I studied on the night bus. I built my understanding of the healthcare industry from the absolute lowest rung of the ladder, learning exactly where the system failed, marginalized people, and figuring out exactly how to fix it. I built my empire in the shadows, fueled by the relentless, burning desire to prove my father wrong. Then I painted the contrast for Julian. I described the parallel universe my sister Chloe was living in during those exact same years. While I was scrubbing vomit off clinic floors, Chloe was handed a fully funded, all-expenses-paid ride to an Ivy League university simply because it looked good on my mother's social resume. When Chloe graduated with a degree, she had no intention of using my parents bought her a luxury condo. When she met Trent, a man whose only discernible talent was failing upward, Calvin and Vivian threw them a $500,000 wedding that was featured in local lifestyle magazines. They poured endless capital into Chloe and Trent, funding down payments, bailing out failed business ventures, and maintaining the illusion of the perfect wealthy family. Chloe was the golden child because she never challenged the script. She played the dutiful, dependent daughter, completely reliant on our parents' money, which meant she was completely under their control. I was the scapegoat because I demanded my own autonomy. Julian listened to this entire history in absolute silence. He absorbed the stark, undeniable dichotomy of my family dynamic. He looked down at the emergency petition on his desk, the document claiming I was a useless, drug-addicted drain on society. The sheer irony of my father's accusation was staggering. Calvin was attempting to weaponize the very thing I had spent my entire adult life fighting against. I was using addiction as a smear tactic against a woman who had literally built an $85 million wellness and recovery network. Julian picked up his silver pen and began taking rapid, precise notes on a legal pad. He told me that my father had constructed a trap out of his own hubris. Calvin and Trent were operating under the delusion that I was still the terrified 18-year-old girl they had thrown out onto the street. They had completely isolated themselves from my reality, choosing to believe their own malicious fiction because it justified their greed. Tanya crossed her arms and asked Julian how we were going to crush them. She demanded to know the immediate next steps, her voice shaking with the kind of fierce loyalty that had kept us bonded since we were broke college students sharing a tiny apartment. Julian looked up from his notepad, his eyes gleaming with a cold, terrifying intellect. He explained that in an emergency ex parte hearing, the judge only sees the petitioner's side of the story. The court grants these temporary orders to prevent immediate harm, operating under the assumption that the family is telling the truth under penalty of perjury. Julian told us that Calvin and Trent had undoubtedly used this temporary order to rush to the banks. He leaned across the desk, looking directly into my eyes, and confirmed my worst suspicion. Julian stated that by this afternoon, Calvin and Trent would serve this fraudulent court order to every major financial institution in the city. They were going to attempt to freeze my assets, lock me out of my personal accounts, and legally suffocate me until I signed over my grandmother trust fund. They were executing a hostile takeover of my life. I did not flinch. I sat perfectly still in the leather chair, processing the legal mechanics of their betrayal. My family was trying to financially execute me. I looked at Julian and asked him what they would find when they brought that fraudulent paperwork to my personal retail bank. Julian's predatory smile returned. He told me they would find a personal checking account with exactly $4,000 in it, completely disconnected from my corporate holding company's offshore investments and the multi-million-dollar operational accounts of the Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network. They were about to freeze a puddle, completely unaware of the ocean that surrounded them. I leaned back into the deep leather chair and let a genuine, chilling laugh escape my throat. I pictured Trent strolling into my local retail bank branch, wearing one of his poorly tailored suits and slapping that fraudulent court order down on the teller counter. I imagined the absolute smugness radiating from his face as the branch manager froze my debit card. Trent probably thought he had just crippled me permanently. He likely drove straight back to my parents' sprawling estate, poured himself a glass of my father premium scotch, and bragged about how easily he had neutralized his rebellious sister-in-law. They genuinely believed that securing a legal hold on my personal retail checking account meant I would be facing eviction by the end of the week. Tanya shook her head, and a mixture of deep disgust and dark amusement washed over her features. She pointed out that I spent more than $4,000 catering the weekly staff appreciation lunches at our flagship recovery clinic. The idea that my father thought this meager sum represented the totality of my life work was incredibly insulting, but it was also the greatest tactical advantage we possessed. They were operating in total darkness while believing they controlled the sun. Julian directed our attention back to the physical documents spread across his glass desk. He wanted to focus on the medical affidavit. He flipped to the back page and tapped his heavy silver pen against the physician's signature. Julian possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of the city power players, and it took him less than a minute to identify the name. Dr. Sterling Arrington. The name clicked in my memory immediately. Sterling Arrington was a prominent cosmetic surgeon who practically lived at the same exclusive country club where my parents spent all their weekends. He was the man responsible for my recent cosmetic procedures, and he was my father's regular golf partner. Dr. Arrington had not laid eyes on me since I was a teenager in high school. Yet here he was putting his entire medical license on the line. He had signed a legally binding document under penalty of perjury, diagnosing me with severe substance abuse disorder and cognitive decline without ever conducting a single clinical evaluation. Julian explained the profound gravity of what we were looking at. This was not just a desperate family grasping at legal straws. This was a highly coordinated conspiracy. Calvin had leveraged his wealthy country club network to procure a fabricated medical assessment explicitly designed to bypass the mandatory psychological evaluations normally required for a conservatorship. Dr. Arrington had weaponized his medical credentials as a favor to a wealthy friend, completely ignorant of the fact that he was handing us the very rope we would use to hang them all in federal court. Tanya asked Julian what the penalty was for a licensed physician submitting a fraudulent medical affidavit in a conservatorship hearing. Julian's eyes darkened with the promise of absolute professional ruin. He assured us that by the time he was finished, Dr. Arrington would not even be legally allowed to prescribe aspirin, let alone maintain his lucrative surgical practice in the suburbs. We were going to report him to the state medical board, the federal oversight committees, and the district attorney office. But Julian cautioned that we could not strike just yet. Julian's legal strategy was entirely reliant on strategic patience. If we immediately filed an emergency injunction and contested the freeze on my personal checking account, we would show our hand way too early. We would signal to Calvin and Trent that I had top-tier legal representation and the financial resources to fight back. It would spook them. They might retreat, withdraw the petition entirely, and attempt to find another more insidious way to force my signature on my grandmother trust fund. I told Julian I completely agreed with his assessment. I wanted them to feel victorious. I wanted them to experience the intoxicating high of absolute power because I knew my father better than anyone. Calvin operated on a very predictable psychological loop. His entire motivation for this asset freeze was not just financial greed to bail out Trent and Chloe. It was about reasserting total dominance over the daughter who defied him. He wanted to break me. He fully expected me to call him in a blind panic. He was waiting for me to show up at his custom iron gates destitute and terrified, begging for access to my own money. He wanted to recreate the exact dynamic of the night he threw me out, forcing me to surrender my autonomy in exchange for his conditional mercy. By giving them complete radio silence, we were going to drive them crazy. And when arrogant people get frustrated by a lack of response, they make reckless, catastrophic mistakes. Julian outlined the legal mechanics of how my actual wealth was shielded from their attack. The Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network was structured under a highly complex web of limited liability companies and corporate holding entities. My personal retail bank account was essentially just a dummy account I used to buy morning coffee and groceries. My primary residence, my vehicles, my real estate investments, and my corporate equity were entirely insulated by thick layers of corporate protection that Trent fraudulent court order could not even scratch. To legally breach those corporate veils, Trent would need a federal subpoena, months of forensic accounting, and a legitimate cause of action. He had none of those things. He only had a fake medical note and a massively inflated ego. Tanya immediately shifted into operational mode. As my chief operating officer, she recognized the potential vulnerabilities on our corporate front. She told me she was going to lock down the entire fortress. She pulled out her phone and began drafting an emergency directive to our Vice President of Human Resources and our Chief Financial Officer. Tanya implemented a strict security protocol across our entire corporate network. If Calvin, Vivian, Chloe, or Trent attempted to contact any of our local clinics, access our corporate headquarters, or inquire about my employment status, they were to be immediately stonewalled and reported to building security. We were going to build an impenetrable wall around my business. My family had no idea that I was the founder and chief executive officer of Oasis, but if they started digging out of frustration, Tanya wanted to ensure they hit a solid brick wall. She even authorized an upgrade to the biometric security scanners at our flagship facility just to be safe. I sat back in the leather chair and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the people sitting in this room with me. My biological family was actively trying to destroy my life and steal my future, but I was not facing them alone. I had built my own family. I had surrounded myself with fiercely loyal, highly competent Black professionals who protected me with the kind of ferocity my own parents never possessed. Julian gathered the fraudulent court documents and locked them inside a secure, fireproof file cabinet behind his desk. He told me to go back to work. He instructed me to continue running my company, finalizing my state contracts, and living my life exactly as I always did. He promised he would monitor the court filings and track Trent's digital footprint to see what their next legal move would be. He explicitly warned me that my silence would severely provoke them. When my father realized I was not going to come crawling back to him, begging for access to my frozen $4,000, he would inevitably escalate the situation. He would try to force my hand. Julian told me to prepare for a vicious smear campaign because people like Calvin and Vivian simply could not tolerate being ignored. They would attempt to destroy my reputation within our community to pressure me into submission. I stood up from the chair and smoothed the fabric of my tailored blazer. I told Julian I was perfectly ready for whatever they threw at me next. I had survived my mother cruel comparisons and my father emotional abandonment. I had survived scrubbing biohazards off clinic floors on the night shift and battling systemic bias to build a massive healthcare empire. A smear campaign from a family of insecure frauds was not going to break my stride. Tanya grabbed her briefcase, her posture radiating absolute confidence. We walked out of Julian Corner office together, stepped into the private elevator, and descended back into the bustling financial district. The afternoon sun was shining brightly as we stepped onto the busy pavement. My personal bank account was officially frozen, but as I walked toward my waiting car, I had never felt more powerful. The countdown to my family absolute destruction had officially begun. I am walking into service at First AME, the church I grew up in, and immediately the temperature in the room drops. The sanctuary smells of polished wood and expensive perfume, a familiar scent that usually brings me comfort. Not today. Today the air is thick with judgment. As I step into the foyer, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the conversations around me abruptly cease. Women I have known since I was in middle school, women who used to pinch my cheeks and tell me I was going to be a brilliant lawyer like my father, suddenly find their programs fascinating. I see Sister Patterson, the head of the usher board, leaning in to whisper to Deacon Hayes. Their eyes dart toward me, filled with a sickening mixture of pity and superiority. They are looking at me like I am a tragedy unfolding in real time. They do not see a successful CEO. They see Vivian's broken, drug-addicted daughter. I can almost hear the narrative my mother has spun, the tragic tale of a brilliant girl who could not handle the pressure of the real world and threw it all away for a cheap high. I keep my spine straight, my chin lifted, and walk to my usual pew near the front. I will not let them see me sweat. I take a seat, smoothing my tailored skirt, and pull out my phone, appearing deeply engrossed in a non-existent email. I know the drill. If I look busy, they might not approach me with their condescending prayers. But my mother's network is thorough. After service, the gauntlet begins. The receiving line is usually a joyous affair, a cacophony of hugs and blessings. Today, it is an obstacle course. I am stopped by Mrs. Dubois, a prominent member of my mother's AKA chapter. She places a heavily ringed hand on my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. She leans in her breath, smelling of peppermint and expensive gin. Zuri, baby, she croons, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Your mother told us everything. We are all praying for your deliverance. The Lord works in mysterious ways, but he can break those chains. The chains she is referring to are entirely fictional, but the chains she is trying to put on me right now are very real. She wants me to break down, to confess, to play the role of the penitent sinner, so she can report back to Vivian with all the juicy details. I look at her hand on my arm, then slowly raise my eyes to meet hers. My gaze is cold, unyielding. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Dubois. I say, my voice perfectly modulated, calm and steady. But I assure you, the only chains I am breaking are the ones trying to hold me back from my next acquisition. If you'll excuse me, I have a very busy week ahead. I gently but firmly remove her hand from my arm and step past her. I can feel the shock radiating her, the sheer audacity of a destitute addict speaking with such clarity and confidence. The smear campaign is in full swing, but they severely underestimated their target. They thought they could break me with whispers, but they only fueled the fire. I walk out of the church, the sun hitting my face, ready for the next round. That round comes sooner than expected. The annual Black Excellence Gala is the social event of the season, a glittering affair where the city's elite gather to network, donate, and most importantly, be seen. I have attended every year since I founded Oasis, usually maintaining a low profile, preferring to write a substantial check rather than work the room. This year, my attendance is strategic. I need to be seen not just as a successful businesswoman, but as a woman who is completely unfazed by the malicious rumors swirling around her. I arrive in a stunning custom emerald green gown that hugs every curve of my marathon-trained body. I look radiant, healthy, and powerful. The moment I enter the ballroom, the whispers start again, but this time they are different. The pity is gone, replaced by confusion. I do not look like a woman who is spiraling out of control. I look like a woman who owns the room. I navigate the gala with the precision of a seasoned general. I speak with investors, local politicians, and hospital administrators, discussing the upcoming expansion of Oasis with sharp, informed insight. I see Calvin across the room hold court with a group of logistics CEOs. He sees me, his eyes widening in shock, then narrowing into a glare of pure fury. I offer him a small, polite smile and raise my glass of sparkling water in a mock toast. He turns away quickly, his face flushed. The highlight of the evening, however, is not my father's reaction, but my sister's. Chloe intercepts me near the bar, her face tight with a forced smile. She is wearing a dress that screams new money, paid for no doubt by the very parents she is helping to defraud me. She leans in close, her voice a low, urgent hiss. You think you are so smart, Zuri? She sneers, her breath smelling of champagne. Showing up here pretending everything is fine. But we both know the truth. You are finished. Sign the trust over to Trent, and maybe, just maybe, Mom and Dad will call off the lawyers. She thinks she has me cornered. She thinks I am putting on a brave face, hiding my desperation behind a designer gown. She has no idea she just handed me the very weapon I need. I casually tap the face of my smartwatch, ending the voice recording I had discreetly initiated the moment I saw her approaching. Thank you, Chloe, I say, my voice smooth and pleasant. I appreciate your concern. I turn and walk away, leaving her standing there completely bewildered. The recording is crystal clear, capturing her explicit attempt at extortion. She just admitted on tape that the conservatorship is a sham, a weapon used to force my signature on the trust documents. The smear campaign, the gala ambush. It was all a desperate attempt to break my spirit before the court hearing. They wanted me isolated, humiliated, and desperate. Instead, they gave me the very evidence I needed to destroy them. The next morning, Julian calls. His voice is tight-clipped. The situation has escalated. Trent, emboldened by the temporary conservatorship order, has made a catastrophic error in judgment. Assuming the order gives him preliminary authority over my assets, he has attempted to use the fraudulent court filings to secure a massive commercial loan. And he didn't just use any property as collateral. He used a downtown commercial building that bears my name, a property I purchased years ago, long before Oasis became a corporate entity. Julian explains that Trent submitted the application to a major federal bank utilizing the forged medical affidavit and the temporary conservatorship order as proof of his authority to act on my behalf. He is trying to borrow millions against an asset he does not own, using documents he knows are fraudulent. Should I contact the bank and block the application? Julian asks, his tone indicating he already knows my answer. I sit at my desk, looking out over the city. Trent has crossed the line from a petty, malicious family dispute into federal wire fraud. He has handed us the ultimate leverage. If we block the application now, he might back off, claim it was a misunderstanding, or try to find another more subtle way to attack me. I need him fully committed. I need him to hang himself with his own arrogance. No, I tell Julian, my voice cold and decisive. Let him submit it. Let the bank process the application. Julian chuckles, a low, predatory sound. He is walking right into a federal indictment. Exactly, I reply. Let him think he has won. Let them all think they have won. While Trent is busy committing federal crimes, I am finalizing the paperwork for the state acquisition of Oasis. The deal is monumental, an $85 million valuation that will solidify my company as the premier rehabilitation network in the region. I am reviewing the final contracts, ensuring every detail is perfect. The contrast between my reality and their delusion is staggering. They are playing checkers trying to steal a trust fund, while I am playing chess securing a legacy. The following week, the mandatory deposition is scheduled. This is the precursor to the formal conservatorship hearing, a chance for both sides to present their evidence and arguments before a mediator. It is the moment they believe they will break me, the moment they will lay out their fabricated evidence and force me to surrender. I am ready. I have the recording of Chloe's extortion attempt, the evidence of Trent's federal wire fraud, and the absolute certainty of my own success. I arrive at the mediator's office with Julian and Tanya. We step into the conference room, and the air is immediately thick with tension. Calvin, Vivian, Chloe, and Trent are already seated, radiating a smug, triumphant energy. Their attorney, a man whose tailored suit cannot hide his underlying incompetence, sits beside them, a thick folder of documents resting on the table in front of him. They look at me, expecting to see a broken, desperate woman. They expect to see the drug addict they have fabricated in their minds. Instead, they see a CEO flanked by a brilliant attorney and a fierce COO ready to dismantle their entire operation. The deposition is about to begin, and they have no idea they are walking into an ambush. I leave the glittering ballroom of the charity gala, feeling a profound, terrifying sense of peace. Before my driver even pulls up to the valet stand, the audio file of Chloe extorting me is securely uploaded to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. My sister thought she was delivering a checkmate, but she had just handed me the very rope my family would use to hang themselves. The next morning, I am sitting in my glass-walled executive suite at Oasis Wellness. The city sprawls out below me, bathed in crisp morning light. Tanya walks in carrying 2 iced matcha lattes and a stack of finalized vendor agreements. We are discussing the logistics of absorbing 3 new behavioral health clinics when my secure private line rings. It is Julian. He does not bother with a greeting. He simply states that my brother-in-law is a spectacularly rare breed of stupid. Julian explains that the situation has escalated far past a petty probate court dispute. Trent, emboldened by the temporary conservatorship order and desperate to cover the massive hole he blew in his investor's seed. Money has made a catastrophic miscalculation. Assuming the emergency order gives him absolute unchecked preliminary authority over my assets, Trent has attempted to leverage a massive commercial loan. Julian details exactly how Trent managed it. While my current corporate empire is shielded behind impenetrable layers of limited liability companies and blind trusts, Trent hired a cheap skip tracer to hunt down any standalone assets registered directly in my legal name. He found one. It is a historic downtown commercial building I purchased nearly a decade ago, back when I was scraping together every penny to open my very first independent clinic. That building is entirely paid off. It sits right in the heart of a rapidly gentrifying district, making it incredibly valuable. Trent saw a debt-free multi-million-dollar asset and his eyes turned to dollar signs. According to the contacts Julian has inside the financial sector, Trent confidently strolled into the regional headquarters of a major federally insured bank first thing this morning. He sat down with a commercial lending officer and presented the fraudulent temporary conservatorship order, along with the fabricated medical affidavit signed by my father golf buddy. Acting as my newly appointed legal guardian, Trent applied for a $3 million commercial line of credit against my building. I listened to Julian relay this information, and the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it takes my breath away. Trent is a man whose entire life has been subsidized by the unearned privilege of his skin color and my parents' bottomless bank accounts. He genuinely believes the rules do not apply to him. He thinks he can walk into a federal institution, wave a piece of paper built on perjury, and walk out with millions of dollars that belong to a black woman he actively despises. Julian's voice drops an octave, thrumming with predatory anticipation. He explains that by submitting those documents to a federal bank, Trent has crossed a massive legal threshold. He is no longer just a greedy relative playing games in family court. He is actively committing bank fraud and federal wire fraud. Julian asks for the green light to immediately contact the bank legal department. He has a cease and desist order drafted and ready to file. He can block the loan application right now, freeze the process, and slap Trent with an emergency injunction before the ink on the application even dries. I look at Tanya, who has been listening to the conversation on speakerphone. Her eyes are wide with fierce, protective anger, but a slow, calculating smile spreads across her face. We are entirely on the same page. I tell Julian to hold the injunction. I instruct him not to call the bank, not to file a single piece of blocking paperwork, and to maintain absolute radio silence. Julian pauses. He warns me that letting the application proceed is risky. If the bank somehow approves and disperses the funds, retrieving the capital will require a messy, drawn-out federal litigation process. I tell him I do not care about the risk. I explain my reasoning with cold, clinical precision. If we stop Trent right now, his lawyer will argue that he was simply exploring financial options out of concern for my well-being. They will spin it as a misunderstanding, a premature action taken by an overwhelmed family member trying to secure funds for my supposed rehabilitation. But if we let the bank process the application, if we let Trent officially sign the final disclosures and attempt to wire those funds, the intent to defraud becomes absolute and undeniable. I want the federal crime to be fully completed. Let him hang himself. Julian lets out a sharp bark of laughter. He agrees to monitor the bank processing timeline through his back channels and tells me to focus on my real business. I end the call and look across the desk at Tanya. My biological family committing federal felonies to steal a fraction of what I own, while we are about to secure a legacy that will outlast us all. I straighten the lapels of my tailored blazer, gather my contract files, and walk down the hall to the main boardroom. Waiting for us inside are the state health commissioners and the executive board of a national healthcare conglomerate. They are not here to discuss my personal life or evaluate my mental state. They are here because the Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network has the highest success rates, the most innovative community outreach programs, and the most efficient operational structure in the state. For the next 4 hours, I completely compartmentalize the toxic circus my family has created. I lead the boardroom negotiations with absolute authority. We dissect profit margins, patient intake capacities, and state-funded expansion initiatives. I command the room, breaking down complex healthcare logistics and demonstrating exactly why my company is valued at $85 million. Tanya operates flawlessly beside me, presenting the operational roadmaps that prove our infrastructure can handle a massive statewide acquisition. By mid-afternoon, the ink is dry on the term sheets. The acquisition is finalized. I have officially secured the largest contract in the history of my company, guaranteeing generational wealth and a permanent, unshakable position of power within the healthcare industry. The contrast between my reality and my family delusion is almost poetic. Calvin and Vivian are sitting in their suburban mansion, probably drinking expensive wine and congratulating themselves on successfully orchestrating my downfall. Chloe is likely browsing luxury real estate listings, dreaming of the lifestyle Trent's stolen loan will buy her. They are playing a petty, malicious game of checkers in the dirt, completely oblivious to the fact that I own the entire board. The silence from my end must be driving them insane. They expect resistance. They expect a terrified, weeping daughter banging on their door, begging for forgiveness and access to a frozen checking account. My total refusal to engage is the ultimate psychological weapon. It starves them of the chaotic energy they feed on. A week passes. The mandatory deposition date looms closer. This is the legally required mediation phase before the formal conservatorship hearing takes place in front of a judge. It is the arena where both parties lay out their evidence. My parents have spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. They believe this deposition is where they will finally break me, where they will present their fabricated evidence of my drug addiction and force me into submission. I spend the evening before the deposition in Julian office preparing our counteroffensive. We meticulously review the audio recording of Chloe extortion attempt, verifying the timestamps, and ensuring the audio clarity is perfect. We catalog the undeniable proof of Trent fraudulent loan application, which the bank is currently reviewing, completely unaware of the radioactive nature of the documents they possess. We compile the certified financial statements, state contracts, and corporate registrations that prove I am the sole owner and active CEO of Oasis Wellness. Julian packs the explosive evidence into a series of thick, unmarked folders. He looks at me, his expression deadly serious, and reminds me that tomorrow is about letting them build their own coffin. My only job is to sit there, look exactly like the broken woman they want to see, and let them lie on the record. The next morning, I arrive at the Neutral Mediator office building, located in the heart of the legal district. I deliberately choose my outfit to feed their delusion. Instead of my usual sharp executive suits, I wear a simple, slightly oversized beige cashmere sweater and plain slacks. I wear minimal makeup, allowing the natural exhaustion of closing an $85 million acquisition to show on my face. To them, I look tired, diminished, and defeated. Julian and Tanya flank me as we walk into the heavily soundproofed conference room. The air inside is immediately suffocating. Sitting on the opposite side of the long mahogany table is my entire toxic bloodline. Calvin sits at the center, radiating a smug patriarchal authority. Vivian is beside him, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning me with a mixture of disgust and triumph. Chloe and Trent sit together looking like they just won the lottery. Trent is practically bouncing his knee with restless, arrogant energy. Next to Calvin sits their attorney, a man with a flashy watch and a condescending smile, clearly operating under the assumption that this will be an easy, open and shut family court matter. They look at me and I see exactly what they want to see. They expect me to crumble. They expect me to beg. They have no idea they just walked into a slaughterhouse. The mediator, a stern woman with sharp glasses, taps her pen against the mahogany table and calls the deposition to order. The court reporter sits in the corner, her fingers hovering over her stenography machine, ready to capture every single word spoken in this room. The red light on the audio recorder blinks. The trap is officially open. Their attorney begins his opening statement. He speaks with a practiced, condescending sorrow, painting a vivid and entirely fabricated picture of my tragic downfall. He calls me a lost cause, a woman who buckled under the pressure of the real world and turned to illicit substances to cope. He reaches into his thick leather briefcase and dramatically slides a series of 8x10 glossy photographs across the table. I look down at the images. They are surveillance photos clearly taken by whatever cheap private investigator Trent managed to hire on a tight budget. The pictures show me wearing my marathon training gear, carrying a duffel bag, and walking into the rear service entrance of a large brick building in the city industrial district. Their lawyer points a manicured finger at the photographs. He states for the record that these images capture me repeatedly frequenting a known high-traffic drug den. He claims this is irrefutable visual proof of my severe narcotic addiction. Tanya shifts next to me. I can feel the heat of her rage radiating through her blazer, but she follows our strict game plan and remains perfectly silent. I look at the photos again. The brick building in the pictures is not a drug den. It is the flagship rehabilitation facility of the Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network. The service entrance is where I park my car so I can bypass the main lobby and head straight to my executive office suite on the 4th floor. I keep my face completely blank. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction of an inch, feeding into their delusion that I am overwhelmed by the weight of their evidence. Vivian lets out a theatrical, trembling sigh and dabs the corners of her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. Calvin sits up straighter, projecting the image of a heartbroken but resolute patriarch doing what is necessary to save his wayward daughter. Julian takes the floor. This is where his brilliance truly shines. Instead of coming out swinging, Julian adopts a remarkably accommodating, almost meek demeanor. He adjusts his suit jacket, looks at the opposing counsel with mild deference, and begins his questioning. His non-threatening approach acts like a powerful narcotic on my father ego. Calvin thrives on dominance, and Julian is deliberately serving him the illusion of absolute control. Julian turns his attention to Calvin and asks him to state his claims clearly for the court reporter. He asks Calvin to confirm under penalty of perjury the exact nature of my current living situation and financial status. Calvin leans forward, his voice booming across the conference room with unwarranted authority. He testifies that I am completely unemployed and have been for years. He swears on the record that I am utterly destitute, living in squalor, and entirely dependent on the illicit drug trade to survive. He states that my physical deterioration is obvious to anyone with eyes, citing my recent weight loss as definitive medical proof of my addiction. Julian nods slowly, as if taking these absurd claims very seriously. He asks Calvin if he is absolutely certain about these facts. He reminds my father that they are on the record, and that these statements will form the foundation of the formal conservatorship hearing. Calvin scoffs, insulted that his authority is even being questioned. He loudly and unequivocally swears to the absolute truth of every single fabricated claim. He states that he knows his daughter better than anyone, and that I am a danger to myself and society. The court reporter captures every syllable. Calvin has just cemented his own perjury. Julian then pivots his attention to Trent. Trent sits up, adjusting his tie, eager to play his role as the benevolent white savior, rescuing his wife family from the embarrassment of a rogue daughter. Julian asks Trent about his proposed role as the financial conservator. He asks Trent to explain why he is the most qualified individual to take over my legal and financial autonomy. Trent smiles, a greasy, self-satisfied smile. He testifies that he has a robust background in corporate finance and investment strategy. He casually glosses over his string of catastrophic bankruptcies, painting himself as a seasoned venture capitalist. He swears under oath that he is stepping up to manage my meager, mismanaged assets purely out of the goodness of his heart. He claims he wants to rehabilitate my finances so I can eventually rehabilitate my life. Julian leans over the mahogany table, his voice dropping to a calm conversational register. He asks Trent directly about the commercial real estate property registered in my name downtown. Trent's eyes light up with pure greed. He takes the bait instantly. Trent testifies that the downtown building is a derelict, underutilized asset that I have carelessly neglected. He claims that as my acting conservator, it is his fiduciary duty to maximize the value of that property to fund my long-term medical care. Julian asks Trent a highly specific surgical question. He asks if Trent has taken any preliminary steps to secure funding against that property. Chloe shifts nervously in her seat, perhaps sensing a slight shift in the atmosphere, but Trent is far too arrogant to read the room. He proudly testifies that he has already submitted a commercial line of credit application to a major federal bank. He states on the record that he used the emergency conservatorship order to initiate a $3 million loan. He boasts that he is simply being proactive, securing the necessary capital to send me to a premium, out-of-state rehabilitation facility where I can no longer embarrass the family. The trap clicks shut with a deafening, invisible finality. I look at Julian. We do not smile, but a shared understanding passes between us. Trent has just confessed under oath and on a recorded legal transcript to committing federal wire fraud and bank fraud. He has officially documented his attempt to leverage a multi-million-dollar loan against a property he does not own using a medical affidavit built on perjury. Their lawyer, completely blind to the massacre that has just occurred, checks his flashy watch and confidently suggests that we conclude the deposition. He looks at Julian with condescending pity, clearly believing that he has thoroughly destroyed our defense. He formally asks Julian if we are ready to discuss settlement terms and the voluntary signing over of my grandmother trust fund to avoid a messy courtroom battle. Julian casually packs his silver pen into his breast pocket. He looks at the opposing counsel and politely declines the settlement offer. He states that we will see them at the formal hearing in front of the judge next week. Calvin stands up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looks down at me, his face twisted in a mask of patriarchal disgust. He tells me that I brought this on myself. He says that if I had just obeyed him, if I had just signed the trust over quietly at the country club, I could have avoided all this humiliation. He tells me that I am a disgrace to the family name. I look up at the man who provided half my DNA. I look at the mother who stood by and watched him tear me down. I look at the sister who smiled while trying to steal my future, and the brother-in-law who arrogantly thought he could conquer a black woman empire with a fake doctor note. I say absolutely nothing. I do not defend myself. I do not argue. I simply gather my purse, stand up, and walk out of the conference room with Tanya and Julian right behind me. The silence I leave in my wake is heavy. Let them enjoy their delusional victory for a few more days. Let them celebrate their flawless performance. They have meticulously built their own gallows, and the formal courtroom hearing is going to be the most brutal execution this city legal district has ever witnessed. The secure line on my desk rings, and it is Julian. His voice is practically humming with predatory energy. He informs me that Trent has just walked into the downtown branch of a major federally insured bank. Trent is sitting in a leather chair across from a commercial lending officer, presenting the fraudulent emergency conservatorship order and the fabricated medical affidavit signed by my father's golf partner. Trent is officially applying for a $3 million commercial line of credit against the historic downtown building registered solely in my name. Julian tells me he has a cease and desist drafted and ready to file. He can have an emergency injunction slapped on Trent before the lending officer even finishes typing the application. He asks for the green light to block the bank application immediately. I tell him no. I instruct Julian to hold the paperwork and maintain absolute radio silence. Julian pauses, warning me that allowing the bank to process the application carries significant risk. If the funds are somehow dispersed, untangling the mess will require months of federal litigation. I tell him I do not care about the risk. I want Trent fully committed. If we block him right now, Calvin and Trent will claim it was a preemptive misunderstanding, a frantic family trying to secure medical funding for a sick relative. They will spin a narrative of good intentions. But if we let Trent submit those forged documents, if we let him sign his name on federal bank disclosures, acknowledging the penalties of perjury, he crosses a massive, irreversible threshold. He graduates from a petty family dispute into textbook federal wire fraud and bank fraud. I tell Julian to let Trent submit the paperwork. Let him feel the rush of his fake victory. Julian lets out a sharp, genuine laugh. He agrees to monitor the banking channels silently and tells me to focus on my real business. I end the call and look across my expansive glass desk at Tanya. She has been listening on speakerphone, her eyes wide with fierce excitement. My biological family is currently digging their own federal graves to steal a fraction of what I own, while Tanya and I are about to secure a legacy that will outlast us all. I straighten the lapels of my tailored blazer, gather my executive contract files, and tell Tanya it is time to go to work. We walk down the long, sunlit corridor of the Oasis Wellness headquarters and enter the main executive boardroom. The room is already occupied by state health commissioners and the executive board of a national healthcare conglomerate. They are not here to discuss my personal life, and they certainly are not here to evaluate my mental state. They are here because Oasis has the highest recovery success rates, the most innovative community outreach programs, and the most efficient operational structure in the state. For the next 4 hours, I completely compartmentalize the toxic circus my family has created. I lead the boardroom negotiations with absolute unwavering authority. We dissect profit margins, patient intake capacities, and state-funded expansion initiatives. I command the room, breaking down complex healthcare logistics and demonstrating exactly why my company is valued at $85 million. Tanya operates flawlessly beside me, presenting the operational roadmaps that prove our infrastructure can easily handle a massive statewide acquisition without compromising our standard of care. The state commissioners throw tough logistical questions at us, testing our scalability. I do not hesitate. I outline our proprietary software systems that track patient progress and our specialized training programs for addiction counselors. I speak with the confidence of a Black woman who started by scrubbing biohazards off clinic floors on the night shift and built an empire through sheer, undeniable competence. I watch the respect solidify in the eyes of the executives sitting across from me. They recognize that they are not just buying a network of clinics. They are buying my vision, my operational blueprint, and my relentless drive. By mid-afternoon, the heavy negotiations conclude. The state officials and the corporate executives are completely satisfied. The leather-bound portfolios are opened, and the final term sheets are placed in front of me. I pick up my favorite fountain pen, a gift Tanya gave me when we opened our very first facility, and I sign my name on the dotted line. The acquisition is finalized. I have officially secured the largest contract in the history of my company. My business valuation is locked in at $85 million, guaranteeing generational wealth and a permanent, unshakable position of power within the healthcare industry. Tanya and I shake hands with the commissioners, exchanging warm, professional smiles. As they file out of the boardroom, Tanya locks the heavy oak doors behind them. We stand alone in the quiet boardroom, the magnitude of what we just accomplished settling over us. Tanya pulls me into a tight, celebratory hug. "We did it," she whispers, her voice thick with pride. "We really did it." I walk over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The contrast between my reality and my family's delusion is almost poetic. Calvin and Vivian are likely sitting in their pristine suburban mansion right now, sipping expensive wine and congratulating themselves on successfully orchestrating my downfall. Chloe is probably browsing luxury real estate listings on her phone, dreaming of the lavish lifestyle Trent's stolen loan will buy her. They are playing a petty, malicious game of checkers in the dirt, completely oblivious to the fact that I own the entire board. The silence from my end must be driving them insane. They expect resistance. They expect a terrified, weeping daughter banging on their country club gates, begging for forgiveness and pleading for access to a frozen checking account. My total refusal to engage is the ultimate psychological weapon. It starves them of the chaotic energy they feed on. They are interpreting my silence as submission, assuming their fraudulent conservatorship has left me paralyzed. A week passes in this state of quiet, strategic anticipation. The mandatory legal deposition date looms closer. This is the required mediation phase before the formal conservatorship hearing takes place in front of a judge. It is the arena where both parties are supposed to lay out their evidence. My parents have spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. They genuinely believe this deposition is where they will finally break me, where they will present their fabricated evidence of my drug addiction and force me into signing away my grandmother's trust fund to avoid a public trial. I spend the evening before the deposition in Julian's downtown office, preparing our counteroffensive. We meticulously review the audio recording of Chloe's extortion attempt at the charity gala, verifying the timestamps and ensuring the audio clarity is perfect, so there is no room for deniability. We catalog the undeniable proof of Trent's fraudulent loan application, which the federal bank is currently reviewing, completely unaware of the radioactive nature of the documents they possess. We compile the certified financial statements, state contracts, and corporate registrations that prove I am the sole owner and active chief executive officer of Oasis Wellness. Julian packs the explosive evidence into a series of thick, unmarked manila folders. He looks at me, his expression deadly serious, and reminds me that tomorrow is about letting them build their own coffin. My only job is to sit there, look exactly like the broken, destitute woman they desperately want to see, and let them lie on the official record. I assure Julian that I am ready. I have spent my entire life being underestimated by my father and my mother. Tomorrow, I will let their arrogance be their absolute undoing. The morning air is crisp as my driver pulls up to the glass and steel building housing the mediator office in the heart of the legal district. I step out onto the pavement, but I do not walk with the commanding stride of a chief executive officer who just closed an $85 million acquisition. Today, I am playing a highly specific role. I am wearing a slightly oversized beige cashmere sweater and plain tailored slacks. I skipped my usual flawless makeup routine, letting the natural exhaustion of the past week of intense corporate negotiations show clearly on my face. To anyone looking, I appear exactly as my family desperately wants me to be: diminished, tired, defeated. Julian and Tanya flank me as we ride the elevator to the 14th floor. When we step into the heavily soundproofed conference room, the air is instantly suffocating. Sitting on the opposite side of the long mahogany table is my entire toxic bloodline. Calvin sits squarely in the center, radiating a smug, patriarchal authority that fills the room. Vivian is beside him, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning my unadorned face and oversized sweater with a sickening mixture of disgust and absolute triumph. She genuinely thinks she has won. Chloe and Trent sit close together, practically buzzing with arrogant energy. Trent is bouncing his knee, looking like a man who just hit a massive jackpot and is merely waiting for the giant cardboard check to arrive. Next to Calvin sits their attorney, a man wearing a flashy gold watch and a condescending smile. He clearly operates under the assumption that this will be an easy, open and shut family court matter against a helpless, broken addict. The mediator, a stern woman with sharp glasses, calls the deposition to order. The court reporter sits in the corner, her fingers hovering over her stenography machine, ready to capture every single word spoken in this room. The red light on the digital audio recorder blinks steadily. The trap is officially open. Their attorney begins his opening statement. He speaks with a practiced, condescending sorrow, painting a vivid and entirely fabricated picture of my tragic downfall. He calls me a lost cause. He tells the mediator that I am a woman who buckled under the immense pressure of the real world and turned to illicit substances to cope with my massive failures. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he reaches into his thick leather briefcase and slides a series of 8x10 glossy photographs across the polished mahogany table. I look down at the images scattered before me. They are surveillance photos clearly taken by whatever cheap private investigator Trent managed to hire on his severely restricted budget. The pictures show me wearing my marathon training gear, carrying a black gym duffel bag, and walking into the rear service entrance of a large brick building located in the city industrial district. Their lawyer points a manicured finger at the photographs. He states for the official record that these images capture me repeatedly, frequenting a known high-traffic drug den. He claims this is irrefutable visual proof of my severe narcotic addiction and my complete descent into the criminal underworld. Tanya shifts slightly in the leather chair next to me. I can feel the heat of her absolute rage radiating through her blazer, but she follows our strict game plan and remains perfectly silent. I look at the photos again and have to actively suppress a sharp laugh. The brick building in the pictures is not a drug den. It is the flagship rehabilitation facility of the Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network. The heavy steel service entrance they photographed is where I park my car so I can bypass the busy main clinic lobby and take the private secure elevator straight to my executive office suite on the 4th floor. I keep my face completely blank. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction of an inch, feeding directly into their delusion that I am overwhelmed by the crushing weight of their evidence. Vivian lets out a theatrical, trembling sigh and dabs the corners of her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. Calvin sits up straighter, adjusting his expensive tie and projecting the image of a heartbroken but resolute patriarch doing what is absolutely necessary to save his wayward daughter. This is where Julian brilliance truly shines. Instead of coming out swinging and tearing their lawyer to shreds with our mountain of evidence, Julian adopts a remarkably accommodating, almost meek demeanor. He adjusts his suit jacket, looks at the opposing counsel with mild deference, and begins his questioning. His non-threatening approach acts like a powerful narcotic on my father's massive ego. Calvin thrives on dominance, and Julian is deliberately serving him the intoxicating illusion of absolute control. Julian turns his attention directly to Calvin. He speaks softly, asking my father to state his claims clearly for the court reporter, so there is no ambiguity on the record. He asks Calvin to confirm under penalty of perjury the exact nature of my current living situation and my financial status. Calvin leans forward, resting his forearms heavily on the table. His voice booms across the conference room with unwarranted authority. He testifies that I am completely unemployed and have been for several years. He swears on the official record that I am utterly destitute, living in squalor, and entirely dependent on the illicit drug trade to survive. He points a finger at the photographs and states that my physical deterioration is obvious to anyone with eyes, citing my recent weight loss as definitive medical proof of my severe addiction. Julian nods slowly, looking highly concerned, as if taking these absurd claims very seriously. He asks Calvin if he is absolutely certain about these facts. He reminds my father very gently that they are on the record and that these statements will form the foundation of the formal conservatorship hearing next week in front of a judge. Calvin scoffs loudly, clearly insulted that his authority is even being questioned by my lawyer. He loudly and unequivocally swears to the absolute truth of every single fabricated claim. He states that he knows his daughter better than anyone in the world, and that I am a distinct danger to myself and society. He claims I am incapable of making even the most basic decisions regarding my own welfare, and that I will end up dead in a gutter without his immediate intervention. The court reporter captures every single syllable. Calvin has just cemented his own perjury, completely unaware that the concrete is rapidly drying around his feet. Julian then pivots his attention to Trent. Trent sits up tall, adjusting his posture, eager to play his role as the benevolent white savior, rescuing his wife family from the embarrassment of a rogue daughter. Julian asks Trent about his proposed role as the financial conservator. He asks Trent to explain to the mediator why he is the most qualified individual to take over my legal and financial autonomy. Trent smiles, a greasy, self-satisfied smile. He testifies that he has a robust background in corporate finance and investment strategy. He casually glosses over his string of catastrophic bankruptcies, painting himself as a seasoned venture capitalist who knows exactly how to handle complex portfolios. He swears under oath that he is stepping up to manage my meager, mismanaged assets purely out of the goodness of his heart to help his grieving wife. He claims he wants to rehabilitate my finances so I can eventually rehabilitate my life. Julian leans over the mahogany table, his voice dropping to a calm conversational register. He asks Trent directly about the commercial real estate property registered in my name downtown. Trent's eyes light up with pure greed. He takes the bait instantly. Trent testifies that the downtown building is a derelict, underutilized asset that I have carelessly neglected due to my substance abuse. He claims that as my acting conservator, it is his fiduciary duty to maximize the value of that property to fund my long-term medical care. Julian asks Trent a highly specific surgical question. He asks if Trent has taken any preliminary steps to secure funding against that property. Chloe shifts nervously in her seat, perhaps sensing a slight shift in the atmosphere, but Trent is far too arrogant to read the room. He proudly testifies that he has already submitted a commercial line of credit application to a major federal bank. He states on the record that he used the emergency conservatorship order to initiate a $3 million loan. He boasts that he is simply being proactive, securing the necessary capital to send me to a premium, out-of-state rehabilitation facility where I can get the help I need and no longer embarrass the family. The trap clicks shut with a deafening, invisible finality. I look at Julian. We do not smile, but a shared understanding passes between us. Trent has just confessed under oath and on a recorded legal transcript to committing federal wire fraud and bank fraud. He has officially documented his attempt to leverage a multi-million-dollar loan against a property he does not own, using a medical affidavit built entirely on perjury. Their attorney, completely blind to the absolute massacre that has just occurred right in front of him, checks his flashy gold watch and confidently suggests that we conclude the deposition. He looks at Julian with condescending pity, clearly believing that he has thoroughly destroyed our defense and backed us into an inescapable corner. He formally asks Julian if we are ready to discuss settlement terms. He suggests that I voluntarily sign over my grandmother's trust fund today to avoid a messy, humiliating public courtroom battle next week. Julian calmly clicks his silver pen closed and slides it into his breast pocket. He looks at the opposing counsel with a perfectly neutral expression and politely declines the settlement offer. He states simply that we will see them at the formal hearing in front of the judge. Calvin stands up and buttons his suit jacket. He looks down at me, his face twisted in a mask of patriarchal disgust. He tells me that I brought this entirely on myself. He says that if I had just obeyed him, if I had just signed the trust over quietly at the country club, I could have avoided all this humiliation. He tells me that I am a complete disgrace to the family name. I look up at the man who provided half my DNA. I look at the mother who stood by and watched him tear me down. I look at the sister who smiled while trying to steal my future, and the brother-in-law who arrogantly thought he could conquer a black woman's empire with a fake doctor's note. I say absolutely nothing. I do not defend myself. I simply gather my purse, stand up, and walk out of the conference room with Tanya and Julian right behind me, leaving them to enjoy their delusional victory for a few more days. 1 week passes. The morning of the formal conservatorship hearing arrives. The air in the city is brisk, but as I step out of my driver's car in front of the county courthouse, I feel a radiating heat of anticipation in my chest. I am not wearing an oversized beige sweater today. Today I am dressed exactly like the founder and chief executive officer of an $85 million corporation. I am wearing a sharp, custom-tailored emerald green power suit, a crisp silk blouse, and my hair is styled with immaculate precision. Tanya walks on my right, carrying her leather briefcase, and Julian walks on my left, projecting the quiet, lethal confidence of an apex predator. We enter the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. Calvin, Vivian, Chloe, and Trent are already seated at the petitioner's table. When they see me walk down the aisle, their collective confusion is palpable. Vivian's eyes dart over my tailored suit and confident posture. Chloe leans in to whisper something to Trent, looking uneasy. They were expecting the broken, exhausted woman from the deposition. They chalk up my appearance to a desperate attempt at playing dress-up for the judge, but the seed of doubt has been planted. The bailiff announces the arrival of the judge, an older, formidable man, known for his strict adherence to procedure and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. The judge takes his seat at the bench, opens the case file, and calls the hearing to order. Their attorney immediately calls Calvin to the witness stand to provide his sworn testimony. Calvin walks up to the stand, places his hand on the Bible, and swears to tell the truth. He sits down and begins his performance. And it truly is an Oscar-worthy performance. Calvin lowers his voice, trying to sound like a heartbroken, desperate father who has exhausted every possible avenue to save his child. He recounts the fabricated story of my downward spiral. He claims I isolated myself from their loving family, that I rejected their endless offers of help, and that I chose a life of squalor over their support. Their attorney pulls out the glossy surveillance photographs from the deposition and submits them into evidence. He asks Calvin to identify the brick building in the pictures. Calvin points a trembling finger directly at me. He raises his voice, letting it echo off the high ceilings of the courtroom, ensuring every single person in the gallery hears his righteous indignation. He roars that I am a drug addict. He screams that I am squandering everything my family built, that I am frequenting dangerous narcotics dens, and that they are filing this petition because they are simply trying to save my life before it is too late. I sit perfectly still at the defense table. I do not flinch. I do not react. I simply stare back at him with absolute chilling peace. The judge looks at Calvin, his expression unreadable. Then he turns his attention to Julian. The judge asks if the defense has any cross-examination or evidence to present before he makes a preliminary ruling on the emergency conservatorship. Julian stands up. He does not bring a few loose sheets of paper to the bench. He picks up a massive, heavily indexed, leather-bound dossier. He walks gracefully to the front of the courtroom, hands the original binder to the judge, and hands a courtesy copy to my father's attorney. The opposing counsel opens the binder, reads the first page, and stops breathing. I watch the color physically drain from the lawyer's face. He looks up at Julian in sheer, unadulterated terror. The judge puts on his reading glasses and opens the dossier. The courtroom is dead silent. The only sound is the rustle of thick paper as the judge flips through the first few tabs. He reviews certified state contracts, corporate registration documents, and verified bank statements. The judge stops. He removes his reading glasses, folds them slowly, and looks directly at my father sitting on the witness stand. The judge leans forward and asks a single devastating question. "Are you sure you know what your daughter does, sir?" Calvin frowns, clearly confused by the question. He puffs out his chest and confidently states that he knows exactly what I do, repeating the lie that I am unemployed and unemployable. Julian turns to the court and requests permission to connect his laptop to the courtroom's visual evidence monitors. The judge grants it. Within seconds, the large flat screens mounted on the courtroom walls flicker to life. Julian projects the official corporate registration documents for the Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network. My name is highlighted in bold as the sole founder and active chief executive officer. Julian clicks to the next slide. He projects the $85 million state acquisition contract that I signed just last week. He explains to the court, his voice ringing with absolute clarity, that I am not unemployed. I am one of the most successful independent healthcare providers in the entire state. Julian clicks again. He projects the surveillance photos my father's attorney submitted as evidence, placing them side by side with the official property deeds and state medical licensing permits. Julian informs the judge that the known drug den my father has been hysterically pointing at is actually a state-funded multi-million-dollar medical rehabilitation facility. It is my flagship clinic. It is a property that I own free and clear. A collective gasp ripples through the gallery. Chloe covers her mouth with her hands. Vivian looks like she might physically pass out, her flawless posture collapsing into the back of her chair. Trent is staring at the screens with wide, panicked eyes, finally realizing the magnitude of the entity he just tried to defraud. But Julian is not finished. He has saved the absolute best for last. Julian projects one final document onto the courtroom monitors. It is a standard vendor contract for corporate logistics and medical supply transport. Julian explains to the judge that Oasis Wellness recently expanded its transportation infrastructure. He points out that just 3 days ago, my corporate parent company signed a highly lucrative multi-year logistics contract with a local shipping firm. Julian zooms in on the signature page of the contract displayed on the screen. My signature sits on the left side under the title of Chief Executive Officer. On the right side, directly parallel to my name, is the signature of the logistics provider. It is Calvin's signature. Julian turns to my father and explains that Calvin was so eager to secure a multi-million-dollar corporate account that he failed to do basic due diligence on the parent company. He failed to read the name of the executive he was contracting with. He failed to realize that the destitute, addicted daughter he was trying to lock in a conservatorship is actually the billionaire client who is currently signing his company's paychecks. Calvin's entire worldview shatters in real time. He grips the wooden railing of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. He looks at the screen, then looks at me sitting calmly at the defense table. His face goes completely gray. He opens his mouth, his booming, authoritative voice reduced to a pathetic, broken whisper as he stammers, "Wait, no." Trent shifts in his leather chair, adjusting the cuffs of a suit that was undoubtedly purchased with my parents' money. He clears his throat and looks directly at the mediator, completely bypassing Julian. He operates under the distinct, arrogant assumption that his mere presence in the room commands inherent authority. He begins his testimony by painting himself as the reluctant but deeply dedicated family savior. He testifies that taking over my life is a heavy, unfortunate burden, but one he is entirely willing to bear to protect his wife and her parents from the profound public disgrace of my existence. Julian leans back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. His expression is a masterclass in polite curiosity. Instead of attacking Trent, Julian asks him to elaborate for the official record on his specific financial qualifications. Julian asks what makes Trent capable of rehabilitating an estate he claims is completely destitute. Trent beams. He practically vibrates with unearned confidence. He launches into a heavily fabricated monologue about his extensive background in venture capital and corporate investment strategies. He speaks about market pivoting and asset management with the slick, rehearsed vocabulary of a man who listens to business podcasts but has never actually built a profitable entity in his life. He casually glosses over the undeniable reality that his last three tech startups imploded catastrophically, leaving behind a trail of angry investors and bankruptcy filings, all of which were quietly settled by my father. He testifies under oath that his superior financial acumen is exactly what is required to salvage my chaotic, drug-addled life. The court reporter types, relentlessly capturing every single syllable of his absolute perjury. Vivian dabs the corners of her perfectly dry eyes, with a tissue playing the role of the exhausted, heartbroken mother. Calvin nods approvingly at his son-in-law, looking incredibly proud of the monster he is actively enabling. Chloe sits beside Trent, radiating a smug, vicious satisfaction. They genuinely believe they are winning. They think Julian is asking these questions because we are desperate and trying to find a legal loophole to avoid the inevitable. They have no idea Julian is simply handing them the shovel and politely asking them to keep digging. Julian slowly flips a page on his yellow legal pad. He asks Trent to explain his immediate operational strategy. He asks how Trent plans to fund this premium, highly secure, out-of-state rehabilitation facility. He keeps mentioning, given that my personal retail checking account holds exactly $4,000. Trent leans forward, eager to demonstrate his proactive brilliance. He states that he conducted a preliminary asset search and located a downtown commercial property registered in my legal name. He calls it a neglected, derelict building, claiming I lacked the basic mental capacity to maintain it due to my severe narcotic addiction. He testifies that it is his strict fiduciary responsibility to leverage this real estate asset immediately to cover the exorbitant costs of my long-term medical care. This is the moment. The air in the conference room feels incredibly thin. Tanya presses the side of her shoe against mine under the mahogany table, a silent electric surge of anticipation passing between us. Julian asks the surgical question. He keeps his tone completely conversational, almost mundane. He asks Trent if he has taken any official preliminary steps to secure funding against this specific commercial property using the temporary emergency conservatorship order. Chloe shifts slightly in her seat, perhaps feeling a primal instinctual warning of danger. But Trent is completely blind to the trap. His white privilege and inflated ego make him immune to caution. He puffs out his chest and proudly testifies that he has already visited the regional headquarters of a major federal banking institution earlier this morning. He states on the official legal record that he submitted a comprehensive commercial loan application for $3 million. Julian pauses. He asks for absolute crystal clear clarification. He wants to ensure the court reporter captures the exact sequence of events. Julian asks Trent to confirm that he walked into a federally insured banking institution, presented the temporary conservatorship order alongside a medical affidavit, and applied for a multi-million-dollar commercial line of credit against a property he does not legally own. Trent smiles a greasy, triumphant smile. He looks right at me, his eyes filled with malicious victory. He says yes. He testifies that he is taking the necessary aggressive steps to protect his sister-in-law from herself before I can sell the building for drug money. I maintain my deadpan expression, but inside I am soaring. Trent has just confessed to federal bank fraud and federal wire fraud on a recorded, legally binding transcript. He has weaponized perjury to commit a federal felony, and he is so spectacularly arrogant, he actually believes he is the hero of the story. He has handed us the ultimate leverage. The state family court dispute just became a matter for the United States Department of Justice. Their attorney, a man whose expensive tailored suit cannot mask his staggering legal incompetence, completely misses the fatal error his client just made. He checks his flashy gold watch and addresses the mediator, stating that the facts are overwhelmingly clear and the deposition has served its purpose. He turns to Julian and offers what he calls a generous, compassionate settlement. He proposes that if I voluntarily sign over my grandmother trust fund to Chloe and Trent today, they will gracefully withdraw the conservatorship petition. They will drop the matter entirely and keep my tragic addiction out of the public courtroom, thereby saving me from permanent public humiliation. He frames it as a mercy mission. Give them my inheritance and they will let me walk away. Julian slowly clicks his silver pen shut. He slides it into the breast pocket of his suit. He looks at the opposing lawyer, then at my father, and politely but firmly declines the settlement offer. He states simply that we reject all terms, and we will see them at the formal hearing in front of the judge next week. Calvin stands up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face twists into a mask of patriarchal disgust and fury. He points a finger at me, warning me that I am making the biggest, most destructive mistake of my miserable life. He tells me that when the judge sees the evidence, I will be locked away in a facility, and I will lose everything anyway. He says I am a complete disgrace to the family name, and that he is washing his hands of me. I do not engage. I do not argue. I do not shed a single tear for the father I lost long ago. I simply stand up, smooth the fabric of my beige cashmere sweater, and gather my purse. I walk out of the conference room with Julian and Tanya flanking me, leaving my toxic bloodline sitting in their own venom. We step into the elevator in complete silence. The heavy metal doors slide shut, cutting off the view of the mediator office. The moment the elevator begins to descend, Tanya lets out a sharp, victorious breath. Julian pulls out his phone and immediately sends an encrypted message to his team to pull the transcript the second it is filed. They have meticulously built their own gallows. The formal courtroom hearing next week is not going to be a legal defense. It is going to be a public execution. The echo of my father's roar bounces off the high vaulted ceilings of the courtroom. I sit perfectly still at the defense table, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I do not flinch. I do not shed a single tear. I maintain absolute chilling silence. Calvin stands in the witness box, breathing heavily, soaking in the dramatic weight of his own performance. He expects the judge to look at him with deep paternal sympathy. He expects the gavel to come down and my life to be handed over to him on a silver platter. Judge Harrison is a no-nonsense veteran of the family court system. He does not offer Calvin a sympathetic nod. Instead, the judge looks down at the opposing counsel, then shifts his gaze to the massive leather-bound dossier Julian quietly submitted to the bench at the start of the hearing. The courtroom holds its collective breath. The only sound is the heavy rustle of premium paper as Judge Harrison opens the binder. The judge flips through the first few index tabs. He reviews the certified state contracts, the corporate registration documents, and the verified bank statements. I watch his expression harden. The indulgent patience he usually reserves for emotional family disputes completely vanishes, replaced by a razor-sharp judicial coldness. He removes his reading glasses, folds them slowly, and places them precisely on the edge of his desk. He leans forward, interlacing his fingers, and looks directly at my father. "Are you sure you know what your daughter does, sir?" The question cuts through the tension like a scalpel. Calvin frowns, visibly offended that his stellar performance is being met with skepticism. He puffs out his chest, grips the edges of the witness stand, and confidently states that he knows exactly what I do. He repeats the malicious lie that I am unemployed, unemployable, and incapable of maintaining a basic standard of living. At the petitioner table, Calvin's attorney finally opens the courtesy copy of the dossier Julian handed him 10 minutes ago. I watch the realization hit him like a freight train. The blood physically drains from the lawyer's face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. He frantically tries to flag down my father, whispering harshly and gesturing for Calvin to stop talking, but Calvin ignores him entirely, blinded by his own arrogance. Julian stands up from his chair. He buttons his suit jacket with fluid grace and requests permission from the bench to connect his laptop to the courtroom visual evidence monitors. Judge Harrison grants the request immediately. Within seconds, the large flat screens mounted on the mahogany walls of the courtroom flicker to life. Julian projects the official corporate registration documents for the Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network. The text is blown up massively on the screens. My name is highlighted in bright yellow as the sole founder and active chief executive officer. Julian clicks his presentation remote. He projects the $85 million state acquisition contract that Tanya and I finalized just last week. Julian explains to the court, his voice ringing with lethal, undeniable clarity, that I am not destitute. He states for the official record that I am one of the most successful independent healthcare providers in the entire state. He points out the verified revenue streams and the massive operational budget that I personally oversee every single day. The silence in the gallery is absolute. Julian clicks to the next slide. He projects the grainy surveillance photos my father's attorney so proudly submitted as evidence of my downfall. He places those photos side by side with official commercial property deeds and state medical licensing permits. Julian turns to the judge and informs the court that the known drug den my father has been hysterically pointing at is actually a state-funded multi-million-dollar medical rehabilitation facility. It is my flagship clinic. It is a property that I purchased, renovated, and own free and clear. The duffel bag I was carrying in the photos did not contain illicit substances. It contained my marathon training gear and my corporate laptop. A collective gasp ripples through the courtroom gallery. Chloe slaps both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Vivian looks like she is going to physically pass out, her flawless posture collapsing as she sinks heavily into the back of her chair. Trent is staring at the high-definition monitors in pure panicked horror. His jaw is practically unhinged as he finally realizes the staggering magnitude of the corporate entity he just tried to defraud. But Julian is not finished. He has saved the absolute best weapon for last. Julian projects one final document onto the courtroom monitors. It is a standard vendor contract for corporate logistics and medical supply transport. Julian calmly explains to the judge that Oasis Wellness recently expanded its transportation infrastructure to handle the influx of patients from our state acquisition. He points out that just 3 days ago, my corporate parent company signed a highly lucrative multi-year logistics contract with a prominent local shipping firm. Julian zooms in on the signature page of the contract displayed brightly on the screen. My signature sits on the left side under the bold title of Chief Executive Officer. On the right side, directly parallel to my name, is the signature of the logistics provider. It is Calvin's signature. Julian turns to my father, who is now gripping the witness stand so tightly his knuckles are completely white. Julian explains to the courtroom that Calvin was so incredibly desperate to secure a multi-million-dollar corporate account for his struggling logistics firm that he failed to do basic due diligence on the parent company. He failed to read the printed name of the executive he was contracting with. He failed to realize that the destitute, addicted daughter he was trying to lock in a conservatorship is actually the billionaire client who is currently signing his company paychecks. Calvin's entire worldview shatters in real time. The arrogant, controlling patriarch dissolves right in front of my eyes. He looks at his own signature magnified on the wall, then slowly turns his head to look at me, sitting calmly at the defense table. His face goes completely gray, matching the color of his tailored suit. He opens his mouth, but his booming, authoritative voice has been reduced to a pathetic, broken whisper as he stammers his final defeat. Wait. No. Before Calvin can attempt to backpedal or invent a new lie, Julian introduces the final nail in the coffin. He formally submits the next exhibit to the court. It is Trent's federal loan application bearing the forged signatures and the fraudulent medical affidavit. Julian explicitly outlines how Trent used the temporary conservatorship order to commit federal wire fraud against a major banking institution. Judge Harrison does not hesitate. He slams his gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack. He immediately dismisses the conservatorship petition with prejudice, meaning they can never file it again. He glares at Calvin's attorney and issues a harsh, immediate sanction for bringing fraudulent medical documents into his courtroom. Then, the judge looks directly at Trent and announces that all transcripts and evidence of fraud and perjury presented today will be forwarded directly to the district attorney and the federal banking authorities. Court officers immediately step forward, instructing Trent to remain in the building for questioning regarding the wire fraud. The court is adjourned. I stand up, smooth my emerald green suit, and gather my purse. I do not look back as I walk down the center aisle of the courtroom, leaving my family to drown in the catastrophic consequences of their own arrogance. Calvin, however, is completely oblivious to the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. He leans forward into the microphone, his chest puffed out with that trademark unearned patriarchal confidence. He loudly insists that he knows exactly what I do. He repeats the malicious, fabricated narrative for the official record, claiming, "I am unemployed, unemployable, and incapable of maintaining a basic standard of living." He gestures toward me with a look of manufactured pity, telling the judge that my life has amounted to absolutely nothing and that his intervention is my only hope for survival. At the petitioner table, Calvin's attorney finally opens the courtesy copy of the dossier Julian handed him 10 minutes ago. I watch the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The blood literally drains from the lawyer's face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. He frantically tries to flag down my father, whispering harshly and tugging at Calvin's sleeve, gesturing for him to stop talking. But Calvin ignores his own legal counsel entirely, utterly blinded by his own arrogance and his desire to perform for the court. Julian stands up from his chair at the defense table. He buttons his tailored suit jacket with fluid, deliberate grace and addresses the bench. He requests formal permission from Judge Harrison to connect his laptop to the courtroom visual evidence monitors. The judge grants the request immediately, his eyes never leaving my father's face. Within seconds, the massive flat screens mounted on the mahogany walls of the courtroom flicker to life. Julian projects the official corporate registration documents for the Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network. The text is blown up massively on the screens so that even the people in the back row of the gallery can read it clearly. My name is highlighted in bright, undeniable yellow. I am listed as the sole founder and active chief executive officer. Julian clicks his presentation remote. The screen transitions to the $85 million state acquisition contract that Tanya and I finalized just last week. Julian explains to the court, his voice ringing with lethal absolute clarity, that I am not destitute. He states for the official record that I am one of the most successful independent healthcare providers in the entire state. He points out the verified revenue streams, the massive operational budget, and the thousands of employees that I personally oversee every single day. The silence in the gallery is absolute. It is the kind of silence that precedes a devastating storm. Julian clicks to the next slide. He projects the grainy amateur surveillance photos my father's attorney so proudly submitted as evidence of my downfall just minutes ago. He places those photos side by side with official commercial property deeds, zoning permits, and state medical licensing certificates. Julian turns to the judge and informs the court that the known drug den my father has been hysterically pointing at is actually a state-funded, multi-million-dollar medical rehabilitation facility. It is my flagship clinic. It is a property that I purchased completely renovated and own free and clear. The black duffel bag I was carrying in the photos did not contain illicit substances. It contained my marathon training gear and my corporate laptop. A collective gasp ripples through the courtroom gallery. Chloe slaps both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with unadulterated shock. Vivian looks like she is going to physically pass out, her flawless country club posture collapsing as she sinks heavily into the back of her chair, grasping her pearl necklace like a lifeline. Trent is staring at the high-definition monitors in pure panicked horror. His jaw is practically unhinged as he finally realizes the staggering magnitude of the corporate entity he just committed federal fraud to try and leverage. But Julian is not finished. He has saved the absolute best weapon for last. Julian projects one final document onto the courtroom monitors. It is a standard vendor contract for corporate logistics and medical supply transport. Julian calmly explains to the judge that Oasis Wellness recently expanded its transportation infrastructure to handle the massive influx of patients resulting from our state acquisition. He points out that just 3 days ago, my corporate parent company signed a highly lucrative, multi-year logistics contract with a prominent local shipping firm to manage our regional supply chain. Julian zooms in on the signature page of the contract displayed brightly on the screen. My signature sits on the left side under the bold title of Chief Executive Officer. On the right side, directly parallel to my name, is the signature of the logistics provider. It is Calvin's signature. Julian turns to my father, who is now gripping the witness stand so tightly his knuckles are completely white. Julian explains to the courtroom that Calvin was so incredibly desperate to secure a multi-million-dollar corporate account for his struggling logistics firm that he failed to do basic due diligence on the parent company. He failed to read the printed name of the executive he was contracting with. He failed to realize that the destitute, addicted daughter he was trying to lock in a conservatorship is actually the billionaire client who is currently signing his company paychecks. Calvin's entire worldview shatters in real time. The arrogant, controlling patriarch dissolves right in front of my eyes. He looks at his own signature magnified on the wall, then slowly turns his head to look at me sitting calmly at the defense table. His face goes completely gray, matching the exact color of his tailored suit. The realization hits him that I am not just his daughter anymore. I am his boss. I am the sole entity keeping his failing logistics company from going completely bankrupt. He opens his mouth, but his booming, authoritative voice has been reduced to a pathetic, broken whisper. He stares at the screen, then at me, and stammers his final, devastating defeat. Wait, no. Before Calvin can even attempt to backpedal, before he can invent a new lie, or try to spin this catastrophic revelation, Julian introduces the final nail in the coffin. He formally submits the next exhibit to the court. It is Trent's federal loan application bearing the forged signatures and the fraudulent medical affidavit. Julian does not hold back. He explicitly outlines for the judge how Trent used the temporary conservatorship order to commit federal wire fraud against a major banking institution. He details how Trent, acting with the full support and knowledge of my parents and his wife, attempted to leverage a $3 million line of credit against a commercial property he had absolutely no legal right to touch. Julian plays the audio recording from the charity gala, letting Chloe's own voice echo through the courtroom as she clearly attempts to extort me into signing over my grandmother's trust. Judge Harrison does not hesitate for a fraction of a second. The look of pure disgust on his face is entirely visible as he looks down at my family. He slams his gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack that makes my mother jump in her seat. He immediately dismisses the conservatorship petition with prejudice, stating clearly for the record that it can never be filed again. He glares at Calvin's attorney, who is now sweating profusely and packing his briefcase with trembling hands, and issues a harsh, immediate sanction for bringing fraudulent medical documents into his courtroom without proper vetting. Then the judge looks directly at Trent. He announces that all transcripts, surveillance photos, audio recordings, and evidence of fraud and perjury presented today will be forwarded directly to the district attorney and the federal banking authorities. He signals to the armed court officers standing by the heavy wooden doors. They immediately step forward, instructing Trent to remain in the building for official questioning regarding the wire fraud. Trent looks at Calvin for help, but Calvin is still staring blankly at the monitors, completely paralyzed by the destruction of his own ego. Chloe begins to sob loud, messy, terrified tears, realizing that her husband is about to be indicted, and their entire lavish lifestyle is over. The court is adjourned. I stand up, smooth the fabric of my emerald green suit, and gather my purse. I look at Tanya, who gives me a slow, victorious nod, and Julian, who snaps his briefcase shut with the satisfaction of a man who just executed a flawless legal slaughter. I do not look back at the petitioner table as I walk down the center aisle of the courtroom, leaving my toxic family to drown in the catastrophic consequences of their own arrogance. Out in the courthouse rotunda, the pristine marble floors echo with the sound of my heels. I am barely halfway to the exit when the heavy courtroom doors swing open behind me. Vivian and Chloe rush out into the hall, sobbing hysterically, their country club poise completely shattered. They run toward me, begging me to intervene. Chloe grabs my arm, playing the sister card with a desperation I have never seen from her. She cries that Trent is going to federal prison, that they will lose their house, that their lives are completely ruined. Vivian begs me to have, reminding me that we are family, completely ignoring the fact that just 20 minutes ago, she was perfectly willing to strip away my basic human rights. I stop walking. I look at them with absolute chilling peace. I do not raise my voice. I slowly remove Chloe's hand from my arm, treating her touch like a contagious disease. You wanted to manage my assets. Chloe, I say, my voice echoing slightly in the vast open space of the rotunda. The only thing you are managing now is a bankruptcy. I turn my back and walk out the front doors into the bright, crisp afternoon sun, leaving my mother and sister screaming for a savior they spent 35 years actively destroying. A month later, the story closes exactly as it should. I am hosting an intimate dinner party on the rooftop terrace of my downtown penthouse. The city lights glitter below us, a sprawling landscape of opportunity and success. There are no blood relatives present tonight. I did not invite people who demand my compliance in exchange for their conditional affection. Instead, I am surrounded by Tanya Julian, my dedicated executive staff, and the true mentors who nurtured my growth when I was scrubbing clinic floors on the night shift. The federal indictment against Trent has officially come down, and Calvin's logistics company is currently undergoing a massive restructuring after I legally and ruthlessly terminated their vendor contract with Oasis Wellness. But tonight is not about them. Tonight is about the empire we built in the shadows and the freedom of walking in the light. I stand at the head of the table, looking at the brilliant, fiercely loyal, chosen family I have surrounded myself with. I raise a glass of sparkling water, holding it high against the backdrop of the city skyline. We toast to unbreakable boundaries, protecting our peace, and the undeniable beautiful power of letting your success be the absolute loudest sound in the room. What do you think about my response? Julian does not immediately speak. He allows my father's malicious lie to hang in the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere of the courtroom. The silence stretches thick and suffocating, wrapping around the mahogany benches and the heavy oak paneling. My father stands in the witness box, his chest puffed out, breathing heavily, as he waits for the judge to offer him the validating sympathy he feels he so richly deserves. He genuinely expects the court to hand him the keys to my life. Julian buttons his tailored suit jacket with deliberate, fluid grace. He turns to the bench and respectfully asks Judge Harrison for permission to utilize the courtroom visual evidence system. The judge, whose expression has hardened into a mask of pure judicial scrutiny, grants the request with a sharp nod. Julian walks back to the defense table and retrieves his sleek silver laptop. He plugs in the connection cable, and high above us, the four massive flat-screen monitors mounted on the courtroom walls hum to life. The glaring white light from the screens illuminates the faces of my family sitting at the petitioner table. They are still clinging to their delusion. Vivian is adjusting her pearl necklace, looking slightly annoyed by the delay, while Chloe whispers something to Trent. They truly believe Julian is grasping at straws, attempting to stall the inevitable. Julian opens the first encrypted file. It is the official Articles of Incorporation from the state registry, verified and stamped by the Secretary of State. He directs the judge to look at the main monitor. Julian states for the official court record that I am not unemployed, destitute, or reliant on my family for survival. He projects the financial summaries, the certified independent audits, and the operational licenses for the Oasis Wellness and Recovery Network. He uses a digital pointer to highlight the executive leadership structure. They're displayed in bold black letters for the entire courtroom to see is my full legal name. I am listed as the sole founder and chief executive officer. Julian methodically walks the judge through our recent corporate achievements. He outlines the sheer scale of the network I built from the ground up, detailing our massive operational budget, the thousands of healthcare professionals we employ across the region, and our exceptional patient recovery success rates. He concludes the first slide by projecting the final term sheets of the $85 million state acquisition contract that Tanya and I executed just days prior. I watch my mother. Vivian's jaw literally drops open. Her carefully maintained high society posture completely dissolves in a matter of seconds. She grips the edge of the heavy wooden table, her knuckles turning bone white as her brain struggles to comprehend the impossible data displayed on the screens. The daughter she discarded, the daughter she has spent the last decade using as a cautionary tale at her elite social gatherings, is worth more than everyone in her country club circle combined. Chloe looks physically ill. The smug, victorious smirk she wore into the courtroom is entirely gone, replaced by a vacant, terrified stare as the reality of my wealth crushes her sense of superiority. Julian is absolutely relentless. He does not give them a single second to recover. He clicks to the next slide, bringing up the grainy, underexposed surveillance photographs that Trent's bargain basement private investigator took. The images show me in my running gear, carrying a black duffel bag and walking into the rear service entrance of a large brick building. Julian places the surveillance photographs side by side with the commercial property deed, the zoning permits, and the state-issued medical facility licenses. He turns to the judge and explains, his voice ringing with lethal clarity, that the building my father just hysterically labeled a known drug den under oath is in fact my flagship medical rehabilitation center. He explains to the court that it is a state-of-the-art, fully staffed, multi-million-dollar clinical facility. I park at the heavy steel service entrance to access my private, secure executive elevator. Julian clarifies for the official record that the black duffel bag I was carrying did not contain illicit narcotics. It contained my running shoes, a change of clothes, and my corporate laptop. The attorney representing my parents finally understands the catastrophic, career-ending reality of his situation. He jumps up, knocking his heavy wooden chair backward, and stammers out a frantic objection, claiming he was not provided this discovery material. Judge Harrison slams his gavel down so hard the sound cracks like a whip. The judge coldly reminds the lawyer that Julian submitted the entire heavily indexed dossier at the very beginning of the hearing. The judge states that it is not the court's fault. The petitioner's counsel was too arrogant to read the documents placed directly in front of him. The lawyer slowly sinks back into his seat, burying his face in his hands. He knows his reputation in this legal district is effectively destroyed. Trent is staring at the high-definition monitors in pure panicked horror. His chest is heaving. He realizes that the commercial property he attempted to leverage for a fraudulent $3 million bank loan is not an abandoned, neglected building. It is a highly secure corporate asset owned by an $85 million healthcare conglomerate. He just committed federal wire fraud against an entity that possesses a legal team capable of burying him under a prison. Julian clicks to the final slide. He addresses the court, stating there is one more vital piece of evidence regarding my father's claim that he must step in to manage my finances because I am a danger to myself. Julian projects a standard vendor agreement onto the massive screens. It is a commercial contract for medical supply transport and corporate logistics. Julian explains that due to our recent massive state expansion, Oasis Wellness needed to rapidly upgrade our regional supply chain infrastructure. He details how we put out a request for proposals and selected a local vendor to handle our operational freight. With surgical precision, Julian zooms in on the signature page of the contract. He explains that just 3 days prior, my corporate parent company executed this highly lucrative multi-year agreement. On the left side of the screen, clearly visible under the title of Chief Executive Officer, is my signature. Julian then directs the court's attention to the right side of the screen, focusing on the signature of the selected logistics provider. It is Calvin's signature. Julian turns to the witness box. He looks directly at my father and explains to the entire courtroom that Calvin was so desperately eager to secure a multi-million-dollar financial lifeline for his failing logistics company that he completely failed to perform basic corporate due diligence. My father did not even bother to read the printed name of the executive he was contracting with. He failed to realize that the allegedly destitute, severely addicted daughter he was trying to lock away in a conservatorship is actually the billionaire client who is currently signing his company's paychecks. The absolute destruction of Calvin's ego happens in real time. The arrogant, controlling patriarch evaporates right in front of my eyes. He stares at the glowing monitors, his eyes tracing the ink of his own signature over and over again, unable to process the magnitude of his fatal error. Slowly, Calvin turns his head to look at me. I am sitting perfectly still at the defense table. I do not offer him a smile of triumph. I do not glare at him with anger. I simply look back at him with an impenetrable, chilling calm. I let him see the powerful, untouchable woman I have become without a single drop of his support. Calvin's face goes completely ash gray. The color literally drains from his skin, leaving him looking hollowed out and incredibly old. He grips the wooden railing of the witness stand, as if it is the only thing tethering him to the earth. He opens his mouth to speak, perhaps to command the room like he has done his entire life, but his booming, authoritative voice is completely gone. He is reduced to a pathetic, trembling whisper. He shakes his head slightly, his eyes wide with a profound, soul-crushing realization, and stammers out 2 final words. Wait, no. Julian does not give my father a single second to recover from the staggering shock of seeing his own corporate logistics contract projected onto the courtroom wall. Before Calvin or his attorney can even attempt to backpedal or invent a new lie to explain away this catastrophic revelation, Julian smoothly pivots back to the bench. He addresses Judge Harrison with the calm, authoritative tone of a man delivering a fatal legal blow. He formally submits Exhibit B into the court record. It is Trent's federal commercial loan application, the document bearing the forged signatures and the entirely fraudulent medical affidavit. Julian lays out the exact undeniable timeline for the judge. He details how Trent, operating with the full support and knowledge of my parents, marched into a federally insured banking institution and attempted to leverage a $3 million line of credit against a commercial property he had absolutely no legal right to touch. Julian plays the audio recording from the charity gala, letting Chloe's own voice bounce off the high mahogany walls of the courtroom as she clearly attempts to extort me into signing over my grandmother's trust fund. The sound of her arrogant champagne-fueled threats completely destroys any remaining illusion that this family was acting out of benevolence or parental concern. Judge Harrison does not hesitate for a fraction of a second. The look of pure, unadulterated disgust on his face is entirely visible as he glares down at the petitioner table. He raises his heavy wooden gavel and slams it down with a sharp, echoing crack that makes my mother violently jump in her upholstered seat. He immediately dismisses the emergency conservatorship petition with prejudice, stating clearly for the official record that this frivolous, malicious filing can never be brought into his or any other courtroom again. The judge then turns his wrath onto Calvin's attorney. The pompous lawyer is currently sweating profusely, packing his leather briefcase with trembling hands, realizing his entire career in this legal district is disintegrating right before his eyes. Judge Harrison issues a harsh, immediate, and severe financial sanction against the attorney for bringing fraudulent medical documents into a court of law without conducting proper evidentiary vetting. He informs the lawyer that a formal complaint will be filed with the State Bar Association before the end of the business day. Finally, the judge looks directly at Trent. He announces that all transcripts, surveillance photos, audio recordings, and evidence of fraud and perjury presented today will be forwarded directly to the district attorney and the federal banking authorities. He signals to the armed court officers standing by the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. They immediately step forward, their hands resting on their utility belts, instructing Trent to step out into the hallway. They inform him he is being detained for official questioning regarding the federal wire fraud and the attempted bank fraud. Trent looks at Calvin for help, his eyes wide with the panicked realization that his unearned privilege cannot save him from federal charges. But Calvin is still staring blankly at the digital monitors, completely paralyzed by the destruction of his own massive ego and the horrifying realization that his logistics company is entirely dependent on my mercy. Chloe begins to sob loud, messy, terrified tears, suddenly understanding that her husband is about to be indicted and their entire lavish country club lifestyle is permanently over. The court is adjourned. I stand up, smooth the fabric of my custom emerald green suit, and gather my designer purse. I look at Tanya, who gives me a slow, victorious nod, and Julian, who snaps his briefcase shut with the profound satisfaction of a man who just executed a flawless legal slaughter. I do not look back at the petitioner table as I walk down the center aisle of the courtroom, leaving my toxic family to drown in the catastrophic consequences of their own spectacular arrogance. Out in the expansive courthouse rotunda, the pristine marble floors echo with the sharp, confident sound of my heels. I am barely halfway to the main exit when the heavy courtroom doors swing open violently behind me. Vivian and Chloe rush out into the hall, sobbing hysterically, their pristine country club poise completely and irreparably shattered. They run toward me, their heels clattering awkwardly against the stone, begging me to intervene. Chloe grabs my arm, her fingers digging into the sleeve of my suit. She plays the sister card with a desperation I have never seen from her before. She cries that Trent is going to federal prison, that they will lose their beautiful house, that their lives are completely ruined. She begs me to call Julian off to tell the judge it was all just a massive family misunderstanding. Vivian stands right behind her, weeping, openly pleading with me to have mercy. She reminds me that we are family, completely ignoring the undeniable fact that just 20 minutes ago she was perfectly willing to strip away my basic human rights and lock me in a facility to steal my money. I stop walking. I do not raise my voice. I do not match their chaotic, frantic energy. I look at them with absolute chilling peace. I slowly remove Chloe's hand from my arm, treating her touch like a contagious disease I have no intention of catching. I look directly into my sister's tear-streaked face. I remind her of the country club brunch, the charity gala, and the arrogant deposition. I let my voice carry slightly in the vast open space of the rotunda. You wanted to manage my assets, Chloe. I say the words slowly, ensuring they carve themselves permanently into her memory. The only thing you are managing now is a bankruptcy. I turn my back on them and walk out the heavy glass front doors into the bright, crisp afternoon sun. I leave my mother and sister screaming for a savior they spent 35 years actively destroying. I step into the back of my waiting town car, Tanya sliding in right beside me. We do not look back as the driver pulls away from the curb. 1 month later, the story closes exactly as it should. The federal indictment against Trent has officially come down, securing his future behind bars for a very long time. Calvin's logistics company is currently undergoing a massive, painful restructuring after I legally and ruthlessly terminated their vendor contract with Oasis Wellness due to a sudden and irreconcilable breach of trust. My father is learning the hard way what it means to be truly destitute. But tonight is not about them. Tonight is about the empire we built in the shadows and the absolute freedom of walking in the light. I am hosting an intimate dinner party on the rooftop terrace of my downtown penthouse. The city lights glitter below us, a sprawling, endless landscape of opportunity and success. The air is warm, filled with the sound of genuine laughter and clinking crystal glasses. There are no blood relatives present tonight. I did not invite people who demand my compliance in exchange for their conditional affection. Instead, I am surrounded by Tanya Julian, my dedicated executive staff, and the true mentors who nurtured my growth back when I was scrubbing clinic floors on the night shift. These are the people who saw my potential when my own parents told me I was worthless. This is my chosen family, the network of brilliant, fiercely loyal individuals who protected me with the kind of ferocity my biological family never possessed. I stand at the head of the long dining table, looking at the beautiful faces illuminated by the soft string lights overhead. I raise a glass of sparkling water, holding it high against the backdrop of the city skyline. I offer a toast to unbreakable boundaries, to protecting our peace at all costs, and to the undeniable. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swing shut behind us with a resounding thud that echoes through the vast marble rotunda of the courthouse. The sudden shift in acoustics is jarring, but the air out here feels infinitely lighter. I am walking flank to flank with Tanya and Julian. My posture is impeccable, and my breathing is completely steady. The custom emerald green fabric of my suit catches the ambient light streaming through the massive skylights overhead. We are halfway across the polished stone floor, heading straight for the main exit when the absolute chaos we left behind finally spills out into the corridor. The courtroom doors burst open violently. The frantic, uncoordinated clatter of high heels against the marble floor rapidly approaches from behind. I do not need to turn around to know exactly who is desperately trying to close the distance. Vivian and Chloe are practically sprinting across the rotunda. They are sobbing hysterically, their pristine country club poise completely and irreparably shattered. The carefully crafted illusion of their high society superiority has dissolved into a messy public display of pure panic. They run toward me, their voices echoing off the stone pillars, begging me to intervene. Chloe reaches me first. She grabs my arm, her manicured fingers digging frantically into the sleeve of my blazer. It is the first time my sister has willingly touched me in over a decade. She plays the sister card with a raw, gasping desperation I have never seen from her before. She cries that Trent is being held by federal officers, that he is going to federal prison, that the bank is going to seize their custom-built estate. She is hyperventilating, sobbing that their lives are completely ruined, and that I have the power to stop the investigation. She begs me to call Julian off to go back inside and tell the judge it was all just a massive family misunderstanding, a simple administrative error. Vivian arrives a second later, completely out of breath. She is weeping openly, her expensive mascara running down her cheeks. She places her hands together in a pleading gesture, begging me to have mercy. She attempts to weaponize the very concept of family she spent my entire life destroying. She reminds me that we share blood, completely ignoring the undeniable fact that just 20 minutes ago she sat in a courtroom perfectly willing to strip away my basic human rights, lock me in a medical facility, and steal my only inheritance. I stop walking. I do not raise my voice to match their chaotic, frantic energy. I do not yell or cause a scene. I look at them with absolute chilling peace. I look down at Chloe, hand gripping my sleeve. I slowly and deliberately reach over and remove her fingers from my arm, treating her touch like a toxic substance I refuse to let contaminate me. I look directly into my sister's tear-streaked face. I remind her of the arrogant smirk she wore at the country club brunch, the malicious threats she whispered at the charity gala, and the smug entitlement she displayed during the deposition. I let my voice carry just enough to cut through the vast open space of the rotunda, ensuring every word lands with lethal precision. You wanted to manage my assets, Chloe. I say the words slowly, etching them permanently into her memory. The only thing you are managing now is a bankruptcy. I turn my back on them. I do not offer a single word of comfort to Vivian. I do not acknowledge her frantic prayers or her sudden, desperate maternal affection. I walk through the heavy glass front doors into the bright, crisp afternoon sun. I leave my mother and sister standing in the center of the courthouse, screaming for a savior they spent 35 years actively destroying. I step into the back of my waiting town car, Tanya sliding in right beside me, and Julian taking the front passenger seat. We do not look back as the driver pulls away from the curb and merges into the downtown traffic. The silence in the back of the car is not heavy or tense. It is the brilliant, weightless silence of a total and complete victory. Over the next 4 weeks, the dominoes fall exactly as Julian predicted. The federal indictment against Trent officially comes down, securing his future behind bars for a very long time. The banking authorities are ruthless in their prosecution of his wire fraud. Calvin Logistics Company undergoes a massive, painful restructuring. The very next morning after the hearing, Julian corporate litigation team legally and unapologetically terminated their vendor contract with Oasis Wellness. We cited a sudden and irreconcilable breach of trust and ethical misconduct. Without the multi-million-dollar revenue stream from my healthcare network, Calvin business essentially implodes. My father is learning the hard way what it means to be truly destitute, experiencing the exact financial ruin he tried to falsely project onto me. But my life is no longer about them. They are a closed chapter, a cautionary tale about the destructive nature of unchecked arrogance and greed. The story closes exactly as it should. 1 month later, on the rooftop terrace of my downtown penthouse, the city lights glitter below us, a sprawling, endless landscape of opportunity and success. The evening air is warm, filled with the sound of genuine laughter, the soft rhythm of a jazz trio playing in the corner, and the clinking of crystal glasses. There are no blood relatives present tonight. I did not invite people who demand my compliance in exchange for their conditional affection. I did not invite anyone who requires me to shrink myself so they can feel large. Instead, I am surrounded by my true family. Tanya is standing by the railing, laughing brightly at a joke Julian just told. My dedicated executive staff, the brilliant Black women and men who helped me build Oasis Wellness from a single clinic into a statewide powerhouse, are enjoying the catered dinner. Mixed among them are the true mentors who nurtured my growth back when I was scrubbing clinic floors on the night shift. These are the people who saw my potential when my own parents told me I was worthless. This is my chosen family, the network of fiercely loyal individuals who protected me with the kind of ferocity my biological family never possessed. I walk to the head of the long candlelit dining table. I look at the beautiful, joyous faces illuminated by the soft string lights overhead. The conversations naturally quiet down as I raise my glass of sparkling water, holding it high against the breathtaking backdrop of the city skyline. I look at Tanya, who raises her glass in return, a fierce smile of pride on her face. I look at Julian, who gives me a respectful nod. I offer a toast to unbreakable boundaries. I toast to protecting our peace at all costs, to trusting our own vision when no one else can see it, and to building empires out of the stones people throw at us. Finally, I toast to the undeniable. The ultimate lesson from Zuri's journey is that blood does not equate to unconditional love and biology never obligates you to tolerate abuse. When the people who should protect you choose to exploit you instead, your greatest weapon is your own undeniable success. Zuri teaches us that establishing ironclad boundaries isn't an act of cruelty, it is an act of profound self-preservation. You never have to shrink yourself to fit into a toxic family's narrative. By walking away and building her empire, she proves that your chosen family, the ones who truly uplift you, is your real foundation. Drop a like and subscribe if you believe in protecting your peace at all costs, and share this story with someone who needs the courage to set their own unbreakable boundaries today.